Your story, like so many others, deserves to be told. Over the years, you've paired your strong vision with an unwavering work ethic. You've asked the most of yourself and brought so much to this community. And as Columbus has become a part of your story, you've become a part of our story. At the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, we see you, the hours you put in every day, the insights you gain at every turn. You've established not only who you are, but also what's next for you, and we're here to help you get there. We help to elevate businesses, support people, expand portfolios, and bring ideas to fruition. We are your champions, knowing that when we all have a seat at the table, our city is stronger for everyone. We empower small business owners, job seekers, and colleagues to seize every opportunity. We're making Columbus a smarter and more open city for all, because you make us better. With every step you take, you elevate our collective understanding and shape where we're headed as a community. And as you're defining everything you'll become, you're making Columbus an example of everything a city can be, because our diversity makes us stronger. The City of Columbus, Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Defined by you, made for us.
At this time, I would like to welcome Director Beverly Stallings Johnson to our virtual stage to officially open our Govern Conference.
Thank you, Daniel. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Mayor Andrew Ginther, myself, and the entire Office of Diversity and Inclusion, the workforce team, we would like to extend a warm welcome to you. We have a fantastic 3-day program coming for you today. Obviously, based on the agenda, we're going to explore several things. We have a fantastic look at DEI across inclusion, innovation, and impact. Our goal is to help all of us learn and gain key takeaways from some of our great leaders within the industry. And we understand the stakes in this conversation. And our goal is value add, because we know you invested your time and your energy in this event. And this is the time. There's a lot that's going on, from COVID to unemployment, to fear, to racial unrest and social unrest. This conversation matters. We can't wait to see what this week holds for you. Again, we are looking for the aha moments. We're looking for the takeaways. We're looking for the insights and the sharing of information in the chat room. If you haven't received it already, we want to make sure that all of us are enjoying this conference, not only virtually, but in person. Hopefully everyone has received their gift box, your swag box. And again, we want you to enjoy us in more ways than one. We want you to learn, and we look forward to seeing you, hearing from you, and your participation this week. And again, thank you for everyone that's helped plan this event so far. We look forward to over 160 plus people participating in this conference today. Daniel, back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Stallings Johnson. Now a quick message from Mayor Andrew Ginther, the mayor of the City of Columbus, and City Council President Shannon Hardin.
Good morning and welcome to Govern. This event is an initiative of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion under the guidance of Director Beverly Stallings Johnson. I'm proud of her and her team for designing this important and timely conference that supports my equity agenda. Both Council President Hardin and I are very grateful for the leadership of this office for the City of Columbus.
Columbus City Council is committed to helping Columbus become a model for diversity and inclusion. We've seen exciting progress over the last few years, from foundational work to ensuring minority contractors can get their fair share of city work, to elevating a small business ecosystem in the midst of a global pandemic. The City of Columbus has been pushing the envelope, but we know there's lots of work ahead. We are thrilled you joined us for this event and are partnering together with us to make all of our cities stronger and more equitable.
I want to invite you into full participation over the next 3 mornings. We'll carve out space each day to hear from speakers and watch relevant videos and interviews that we're calling D&I micro-learnings. You'll also be able to participate in Q&As and interactive breakout sessions. I hope you'll engage in all of the exciting agenda items we've got planned for you. I also want to thank all of our speakers. We're honored that you've chosen to spend some of your valuable time and invest some of your precious experience with us. This event will be better because you're part of it. Welcome and have fun.
All right. Good morning again to everybody. It is fantastic to see everybody on. I'm looking at our attendance numbers and we're at 144, and I'm sure that's going to go up a few more. We had about 165, 170 register all across the state of Ohio, city of Columbus, and beyond. And so we're just thrilled that everyone has carved out time, like Mayor Ginther said, for this. We're so glad you're here. You know, it's been quite a year of shifts for everybody, and that's us included as a conference team. You know, this event came about in a conversation in a restaurant almost exactly a year ago about what we might create in the public sector to equip and put tools into the toolbox of public sector employees and beyond, in terms of making their spaces more equitable and more inclusive. And clearly, if we were talking back in October of 2019, we weren't thinking about COVID yet. And so we had this incredible, intimate, live space getting planned and ready, and we've had to shift like everybody else. And so we're thrilled that you've continued on this journey with us, thrilled to be here with you this morning and to see this come into fruition. If you look at the bottom of your toolbar, you can see your Zoom toolbar. You can see a little chat box there. And if you click on that, if you're unfamiliar with Zoom or haven't done that yet, you can click on that and you'll see across the right side of your screen a chat box. And people are saying good morning, all kinds of folks greeting each other this morning. I'd encourage you to participate. One of the best parts of a virtual conference is making it feel as inclusive and engaging as possible, right? And that means interacting with one another. So please feel free to scan through the participant list, see who's here. You have the option in that chat box when you type, there's a little blue bubble that says everyone. And if you type and it says everyone in the conference will see that. So if you would like us, all 145 of us, to see what you're typing, type and say good morning to us. We would love to see you and hear from you today. Hear from you virtually. Please mute your microphones. Thank you. It's going to be a mess if we get a bunch of mics unmuted. So keep your mics on mute. But we want to hear your good morning messages. And we really would love to see you interacting with the content in that chat box, to see you asking questions and re-quoting something interesting a speaker said. Love to see how you're processing what's happening live. And that can be really instructive for other participants, right? Because sometimes you get these speakers and these panels and they're saying all this wonderful and great stuff, but it's moving so quickly, a lot of us get lost. And in that chat box, some of us really depend on those of you who can process and digest information really quickly and summarize it. Some of us really depend on you to spit back information into that chat box and say, wow, did you hear that quote? Type it up, and then we can see it again. So if you're one of those people, please take over that chat box and let us know how, what we might be missing if we can't listen and digest as quickly as you can. The other thing that chat box is going to be used for across the conference is to ask questions of our speakers. Now, we know that if we start unmuting microphones and start trying to ask live questions, it's just going to get really messy, right, in terms of the audio disruption. And so we're going to use the chat feature to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to ask the questions that they want to ask. So this morning, during our keynote interview with Dr. Tiffany Janna, who you are absolutely going to love, and in our panel discussion with Mayor Ginther and Mayor Whaley from Dayton, and Chief of Staff Catherine Crosby from Toledo, you can ask all of the questions that you want to ask by sending those chat messages either into the chat room, or if you scroll down the participant list, when you click that little blue bubble in your chat box, you'll see Jordan Kaiser's name. And you can send a private message if you'd prefer to ask your question privately. You can send it to her She'll then send that question to the panel moderator or myself, and we'll get that question asked as we have time to the speaker or the panel. So there are a couple of ways. Feel free to just shoot it into the text box, the chat box, or send it privately to Jordan. All right, I'm already getting into instructions because I'm so excited to get started. I want to pause for a minute and just say thank you for being here. Thanks to our sponsors, the City of Columbus and the Office of Diversity and Inclusion has invested serious energy, time, passion, commitment, and vision into this event over the last year across a number of really significant shifts. And I'm so thankful to be a part of this process with them. So thankful for their thought leadership and all of the phone calls and all of the meetings and all of the touch bases that we've had for this. So grateful for their support financially and in terms of passion and thought leadership. Also want to say thank you to Franklin County here in Central Ohio for their sponsorship of this event, as well as the City of Dayton and the City of Toledo. We are all in this together, and it was so meaningful for me personally, and I know for the team, to see other cities step up and meeting some of the financial needs around putting on a conference like this to say, we're here, we're with you, we're in this, let's do this together, because the goal here is to make Ohio and beyond a better place to live, work, and play for everybody. Thanks to attendees, thanks for being here and for investing your time in that goal. I want to just make note of a couple of recognition months. This is National Hispanic Heritage Month. So if you or someone you know or love identifies with that population, we say happy National Hispanic Heritage Month to you. It's also National Disability Employment Awareness Month and National LGBT History Month. So there's a lot going on in this few weeks from mid-September to mid-October. So feel free to send colleagues and people you love and care about happy recognition months. That's, I know, always a meaningful thing for folks. All right, you can feel free if you'd like to mute your video as well. Tomorrow and Thursday, we're going to have live breakout groups with you. We'll encourage you to turn your video cameras back on and engage with small groups of people as we break out. Today, because we've got a special keynote, you don't necessarily need to have your video camera on unless you want to. So feel free to turn your camera off if that makes you more comfortable and helps you settle in. We encourage you to own the space however you need to own it. Please do keep your microphone on mute. That helps us a lot in managing some of the audio and visual disruptions. And I just want to send out a couple of goals for today so that you know from the get-go, what are we trying to accomplish over the next 3 days? We're trying to zoom up a little bit. We're going to hear from some really impactful and effective high influence, high impact leaders across the next 3 days. And we want to zoom up with those folks into a wide scope of influence and here's some of the thought leadership that happens when you're operating at kind of the 30,000-foot view of leadership, and what that does for those of us who sort of are the on the ground sort of space creators and working to make our spaces more inclusive is it can raise us out of the trenches a little bit. It's aspirational, right? Here are some of the big ideas that we want to wrestle with. The other thing we want to do in this conference over the next 3 days is zoom in. Right? We want to get concrete. We want to figure out what can I do in my role with my sphere of influence in terms of the impact that I'm able to create. What action can I take? Right? We're zooming up, which is aspirational, and we're zooming in, which is action oriented. And I really hope that both of those things happen for you, not only today, but Wednesday and Thursday as well. So without further ado, I want to transition into our next segment. We've got an absolutely phenomenal keynote speaker who you're going to love. I will say, if you look at that bottom toolbar, you'll see there's a closed captioning option. Feel free to hit closed captioning on. That's a service that we're providing to you. For some of us, that really helps us follow the audio better. So please feel free to utilize the closed captioning. You can just hit that button and select turn captions on. So our keynote speaker this morning is Dr. Tiffany Janna, and I'm going to interview her with a series of questions, but my real goal is just to get out of her way because she is one of the most amazing people I've been fortunate enough to meet. She's the founder of TMI Consulting Incorporated, which is a diversity, equity, and inclusion management consulting firm. And She founded that in 2003. She's headquartered in Richmond, Virginia, and she has established this national network of consultants as the first certified benefit corporation with a diversity and inclusion focus, and has really positioned herself and her organization, TMI, as a global leader in social enterprise value-based metrics. She's a 5-time, I believe, author and co-author. A couple of her books are Overcoming Bias, Building Authentic Relationships Across Difference, and Erasing Institutional Bias, How to Create Systemic Change for Organizational Inclusion. She's spoken on the TEDx stage about privilege, which is no easy task, and on the South by Southwest stage on unconscious bias. So without further ado, please join me in virtual claps for Dr. Tiffany Janna. Good morning, Dr. Janna.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. You found some fun pictures there. Well done.
Well, that was, if you like them, I'll say, well, thanks. That was great. And if you didn't like them, I'll say, oh, one of our team members so graciously put them together, but I'll tell her later they were good.
I love it. Thank you.
No, I don't throw people under the bus. I'm so thankful. Jordan Kaiser put those series of images together for us because we wanted people to see you in action, because the virtual space is just hard to get a hold of that. So how are you this morning?
Tell Jordan I want that slide. I love it. It does me great honor. No, I'm doing great.
Good.
Thank you.
Good. How are you? How are you?
Oh, I'm doing a qualifier. I'm doing pandemic good is what I call it these days, because it's weird to be doing well in this time. But as long as we have that qualifier that there is a lot going on and it's impacting us in different ways, then I am doing relatively well by most standards. So
yeah, it is a little bit, it's a little bit strange, right? To think about just how are you? I'm fine, because yeah, I get it. I happen to be fine, and things aren't fine.
No.
And I don't, it's hard to know, right? Do I qualify every introduction I have with people all day long? Or do I just say, hey, it is what it is, and relative to everything else, I'm fine. I don't know. That's
why I like pandemic good. I'm pandemic good. Like there's an awful state of affairs out here, and also I happen to be thriving, and for that I'm incredibly grateful, and I recognize that itself is a privilege.
That's right. That's right. Well, I am so glad that you're here with us today. We had a kind of an exploratory content call a little while ago, and just to be transparent with you, coming into that call, I was a little bit like, oh, Dr. Janna's going to be great. She's a hardcore writer, speaker, thinker. She'll be awesome. And then after the call, I was like, I can't wait to have Dr. Janna.
Oh, thank you.
The energy was so good. I can't wait. And once all this is over, I might try to find my way down to Richmond and hang out. I think there's a mutually known speakeasy that we could hit together. and you know who we're talking about. You. All right. Well, if you would just start us off, because I bet a lot of the people on the call aren't familiar with you and some of your work. So I'd love just not only if you would introduce yourself and give us a sense of who you are and a little bit of your background, but also maybe take your time with your introduction a little bit and tell the story a little bit of how did you get here, not just to this conference, but how did you end up in a space where you're writing books in the diversity inclusion space and building organizations and becoming an entrepreneur? And you got a lot of notches on your belt. And what has some of that journey looked like for you? Just contextualize yourself for us a little.
Well, contextually, the short answer is I am a busybody, and I really just say yes a lot to adventure. I identify as a pleasure activist, so I believe in liberation through joy. The business model that I employ with my company is 100% aspirational. I don't believe in blame and shame. I think that we can leverage diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice in service of the highest possible goals in ways that make people feel activated and engaged and really honored. And so that is something that I live into. But the source of all of this joy is actually my mother. It goes back to my DNA through generations. My mother, Dr. Deborah Egerton, is a pioneer in this field. She lived through the civil rights movement, and she is a behavioral psychologist, a PhD, who stood up offices of multicultural affairs across the country and worked with government institutions and institutions across the country and around the world as this industry was, finding itself. And when you think of an industry that is, only came around in the late 60s, it's fairly young as far as our main industries go outside of high tech stuff. So I was a child who grew up with a mompreneur, and when you are 5 times intersectional, we can talk about that later. It's a pretty extraordinary thing to have, a Black female parent who is, thriving and running her own shop and doing her own thing. So for me, that was more than possible. It was like a real option, and it was right in front of me. But my family is full of liberators and freedom fighters and educators and lawyers who have been doing work that is related to the liberation of humankind, often with a focus on our folks, but not always. Generally speaking, it's the marginalized. So we've been doing this kind of work since the days of enslavement. Like I've got some of the, the manuscripts that my enslaved ancestors learned how to read on, which is something I think I talk about in my TED Talk when I talk about privilege. So I get to do this work because there were privileges bestowed upon me by but through the generations by the white enslaver of my ancestors, who took a liking to my, to my great, however many times that goes back, grandmother, and took it upon himself to teach my ancestor how to read. And that simple act of privilege, that illegal act of privilege, that particular thing moved forward through time and created a legacy of an African-American family that has been educated and then college educated from the earliest days that we had access to that kind of thing. So I experience myself as extremely privileged, and it is my great honor and my duty to give back and create a world where other people get to feel as present in themselves to be who they are wherever they go.
Mm-hmm. That is amazing. Wow. I'd like to unpack that more, but we got a lot to talk about. Liberation through joy. Now I really want to go get a drink with you and talk. So to contextualize this conversation from our end, not every single participant, but we've got about 155 folks, and the vast majority of them work in the public sector at local or state government levels. And so I'd love to just hear your thoughts as we get going. You and I both know we have a lot of content we'd love to cover, but as we get started, can you just contextualize for us a little bit, what is this conversation about as it relates to the public sector? And, we're talking about diversity and inclusion. When we say the words diversity and inclusion in professional spaces, right away we think about companies and recruiting target goals and things like that. A lot of the people on the call aren't recruiting managers in the private sector. They're frontline or manager level positions in the public sector. So can you talk a little bit about how you see the conversations that you typically have intersecting now with who we are in this moment, in this conference?
Yeah. I mean, the public sector is an incredibly important one. I would say that, from the earliest days, I started my company 17 years ago, started mostly nonprofits were the first folks who just automatically understood this work. And then the public sector was the next group that really kind of got it and engaged. So I've worked with folks in the public sector, local, state, national, and also international governments as well. And it's such an enormous responsibility because you all really do have the opportunity to set the tone for the citizenry, for the residents. It's so much more than just a corporate imperative, because we are creating community at every level. It is our municipalities, it is our estates, it is our governments that people turn to meet their most basic and in some cases most complex needs. It really is a system that is designed to be there for people. We are civil servants in the public sector. And so to me, it is an extraordinary duty. Far more than, just, a lot of people are focused on the business case for diversity, and it's about the bottom line, and it's about, productivity and innovation. And yes, the public sector can certainly benefit from some of those business cases and those metrics driven reasons for engaging. But as this, industry shifts towards JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, right? More than just diversity, bodies, inclusion, how do we invite people to the work? But when we're talking about really creating space for people to have equitable experiences and equitable access, this is something that the government can do like no one else. And so as whether you are an individual contributor, frontline worker, or the director, of your agency, the opportunity to identify the access that you have, the leverage that you have to be in greater service to that community, the level of contact and understanding that you have of the needs of your community really affect your ability to be there and be responsive and still to innovate in service of meeting those folks' needs. So I think it's one of the most important pieces of work that anybody can do. It's the most important sector that anyone can be involved in, and very much relevant to the tenets of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion work.
Yeah, that's so good. I wonder if we just pause for a second, because so many of us are used to saying, and I know the panel is going to talk about some of the changing language of this conversation, but many of us are used to hearing diversity, and then it was diversity and inclusion, and I don't want to steal any of the panel's thunder, but you just added a J in there, and for some of us, maybe that's the first time I'm seeing in the chat box, like, wow, Jedi, that's such a good, when you think about justice, and knowing, the goal for the conference is to zoom up and think about sort of thought leadership. What are we really talking about in big sort of exploratory ways, and zoom in? What's the concrete? What does that mean?
Yes.
Can you talk for a minute or two about what you mean when you say justice, and why you're adding it to the acronym?
I mean, really, I'm just a sci-fi nerd, and it's totally an opportunity to finally be a Jedi Master. Well,
there's a new certification coming out of TNI Incorporated. You can be a Jedi Master.
Exactly. We are
for the low price of
Jedi workers. It's pretty cool. So yes, that is definitely part of why it appeals to me personally, because we're definitely on the light side of things. But the J in the Jedi acronym really, as far as I understand it, came from the West Coast. And it came from largely the nonprofit sector. So the only people who were talking about justice before the lynching of George Floyd were nonprofits that were doing social justice related work. Food justice industry took on the J very, very early. And it's now starting to migrate east and starting to spread into the rest of the work. And the reason that it's relevant, no one was talking about anti-racism, in the workplace, in the corporate context, even in the government context to this degree, until this racialized moment brought us to a crescendo where our perspectives were shifted dramatically, whether we liked it or not, right? So this moment brought us here. And what justice means is that we are, it's not just about counting the bodies. It's not just about inviting people to the work or inviting people for access, but it is really about making sure that people have the opportunity to thrive, to be successful, and to just be safe and okay, right? Mm-hmm. So it's beyond creating a sense of belonging. It goes back to things like, and it's difficult because this definitely overlaps very strongly with that government space, because, I've got a 23-year-old son with whom I had to have the talk because Black men are disproportionately pulled over and affected by law enforcement, et cetera. And the justice component is making sure that our people, our residents, and our citizens are able to thrive and access the safety and the benefits of being part of a city, part of a state, part of a country, and do so in a way that is fair and equitable, and not be disproportionately adversely affected because of or as a result of any of their inherent identities. And so we want to create a world, freedom and justice for all. Like, these are things that we as Americans really want to live into, and that justice is an opportunity for us to do that. The way that I see it playing out specifically in the corporate world and in the nonprofit world is, for instance, justice can be environmental justice, food justice, racial justice. There's lots of different ways to do it. But what people do is they look at the intersection of our industry, our work, and like racism, right? So if you happen to be in food, and that racism is just one, if you happen to be in the food work and you want to look at how has our work adversely affected particular populations based on identity, well, food deserts, low income communities not having access to healthy and safe and affordable food, et cetera. And so as people look for how to be environmentally just, racially just, socially just, they're looking for how their industry has hurt people based on demographics. And the good news about being in 2020 is we have mountains of data that can drive the work we do, so that we can begin to see the impact of the good work that we're trying to affect.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're really taking us in a very organic transition into a place that I want to take the conversation and thinking about just the shift. You know, you've mentioned George Floyd a couple of times. We're talking about some of the shift in the language to, I don't know, for lack of a better term, accommodate some of the new things we want to start including, whether we're in public or private sector, around justice and sort of enlarging or expanding the conversation. How has the last 6 months of sort of this, I don't know if it's a cultural zeitgeist or at least highly, this renewed visibility around racial justice across our history and sort of a little bit of a new reckoning or at least grappling with it. At the highest levels of conversation that we're having with leaders in diversity, inclusion, and transformational leadership spaces, how is the conversation shifting as a result of the last 6 months, and where do you think we're going here?
So the first thing is that over the last, so if I go all the way back, like let's say 10 years, when I go back 10 years, 100% of the initiatives that were coming out of organizations looking for diversity, and at the time it was just diversity and inclusion work or diversity work, it was coming from the top of the organization. Someone in leadership, in HR, talent management, maybe even the CEO, a VP said, let's do some diversity for whatever reasons. Often it was adverse litigation that drove the work, right? And that's just reality. 5 years ago, there was a significant shift, and I'm not quite sure how it happened, but what I noticed was that the vast majority of the people who were entering into the work were starting to see pressure from the lowest levels of the organization. So individual contributors, people who work for the organization were saying, look, like, we don't want to file HR complaints. We don't want to take out EEO lawsuits. We just know that we can be treated better and that there's a better way to do this, and that there are people out there, organizations like TMI Consulting, that can help us. Please hire them. Right? Whether it was the exit interview that did it or a committee of people that were just like, hey, help us out here. So it started to come from the bottom up, grassroots. Very interesting. What's happening now is, and I'm going to use the language of my brilliant mother, she says that it took 8 minutes and 46 seconds to crack open the human heart. We were already vulnerable. We were already traumatized by the pandemic, by the quarantines, right? And we were captive to our screens. We didn't have much else to do. And we all collectively witnessed an atrocity happen towards one of our human siblings. It's not like when you strip away race and gender and sexual orientation and socioeconomic class, a human being was murdered in front of us. And in 8 minutes and 46 seconds, our hearts were cracked open. And that's what it took for people to realize. I mean, even the most woke white people who are, who don't have a racist bone in their bodies, saw something and experienced something at a different level. There's a difference between intellectually and academically understanding racism, right? And like knowing about it and feeling it in the core of your being, right? Because this is why the emotional tax on being Black is so high, because we feel it every day. Like, I can tell when you walk by me and you look at me and you just don't have time for Black people or women or non-binary people or LGBT people, whatever it is, I can feel that in my soul. You can't hide it very well. Well, that's what it's like to be marginalized, to be underrepresented, to be intersectional every single day. A critical mass of white people in the United States and all over the world were able to experience something that caused the marginalization and the racism against Black people in particular to become real, to be cemented and become kind of something that just couldn't be argued with anymore. So what's happening now is, for the first time in my lifetime, okay, I always considered my work to be cathedral building work. I never thought I'd see a Black president, much less a moment where, in my city, there were more white people marching for Black lives than there were Black people. This is a majority Black city. So to see the world in all of its colors and faces coming together in service of humankind, that's what is different. We have, whether anyone likes it or not, the delusion of white supremacy has created a construct where white people have more access to the levers of power. And so when majority folks, and that's majority in the United States, because people of the global majority are actually brown people, don't get that twisted. But when you have majority white people in Europe and the United States, for instance, who are walking with us lockstep, arm in arm, hand in hand, and saying, enough, this is not okay. Now we have the opportunity for momentum, for seismic shift that we've never been able to have before. So what we're seeing now is conversations with power, conversations with impact, organizations that are not just blackwashing and putting out Black Lives Matter support statements, but that are putting millions of dollars behind the work that they're trying to do in unraveling their own, their own biased history, their own biased behaviors, policies, systems, structures, institutions, and actually moving towards meaningful and impactful change, both for the people who work with them and for the constituents and the customers and the folks that they impact.
You should take a breath. Okay, good. And a drink. I love a word that I use a lot in my work is shift, right? And you're talking about from 10 years to 5 years to now, tracing this shift really of litigation to cognition to this visceral response to what we see. And I see that and track that with you, and I'm there. I want to push a little bit into a deeper conversation with you about, you said, and now it's this visceral experience and you can't argue with it. But the fact is, a lot of people are arguing with it. There is a contingent across our communities, in our work teams, in our units, in our departments. There are some people who hear you say that and say, yeah, I can barely sleep anymore thinking about what neighbors and people I love and people I know are going through, and I finally have woken up or whatever. And there are people who are saying, no, I think this systemic racism either A, is a sort of straw man argument and I'm not on board, or B, that has nothing to do with me in real time. That was 200, 300, 400 years ago. We've had the civil rights movement. Like, we can't keep looking backwards. We have to look ahead. And so for the folks on our call, I would love for you to kind of dive right into that space of how do we actually shift, knowing that if I have a team of 12 people, I probably have 4 or 5 different perspectives within that team around what is true,
right?
What is actually happening. And we're not all in agreement. And we're trying to get this job done. Maybe we work in public utilities and we're trying to make sure people have water or something. And that's the thing we need to do. But in the context of that, there are large justice-based conversations about why we do that work and providing water, and conversations around who's on our team, who's not on our team, who has a voice and a vote on the team, all those kinds of things. How do you catalyze the shift when not everybody agrees where we've come from, where we are, and where we should go?
So the first thing I want to do is qualify what I said. And like, as a diversity practitioner, I find it bizarre that there are people in my field who put themselves in echo chambers like everyone else, or like so many other people, and allow themselves to only be surrounded by ideas that they believe in and they support. So my friends, right? My friends, my family, my constituency spans the ideologic spectrum. So I have people who vote across the spectrum, who are in my life, who I care about, who I can have healthy conversations with. I believe that our inability to engage in civil discourse has been eroded and is super problematic. When you think of the salons, right, of old, like back in the day, the whole point was to get together and have intellectual discourse with people who thought and believed and experienced life in different ways than you. And you could banter and you could argue and you could throw things across the room if you really felt like it, but then you would have a nice glass of wine afterwards, laugh, and continue to be in relationship after that moment. So that is problematic, that we're losing our ability to have the conversation. When I talked about everyone was able to see, when I look across my ideologic spectrum of friends and constituents, it doesn't matter who anyone voted before or what they believe. No one can look at what happened to George Floyd. No one who I can have a conversation with can say, oh yeah, that was totally okay. Like, oh yeah, no big deal. That was just fine. No one says that, right? Just nobody says that. Now, they might think that it's not, maybe it's not endemic. Maybe it's not something that's happening everywhere. All of the other arguments, I hear you. That's correct. But what it did was it showed us a moment where we saw something very specific, and it shown a light on something really troubling. So here's the deal in the workplace. So at the end of the day, we are, working for our cities, our states, our government, and this is still a workplace construct. And it's very, it's interesting that I have to say this to people, but it's a little nuance, but a very important one. What people think and believe is none of your business. You have no right, and I as a practitioner have no right whatsoever to get in anyone's head and change what they think and believe. That is not your place, not as a director, not as a leader, not as an anything. You just don't get to do that. I don't care if you're a talent manager, a trainer, etc. You don't get to change what people think and believe. As an employer, as a colleague, as a supervisor, as a manager, the only thing that you have any right to fiddle with is behavior. You focus on behavior. As employers, as institutions, we absolutely have the right and the responsibility to guide people towards appropriate, inclusive behavior that creates a sense of welcome and belonging for everyone. That is appropriate. So if your beliefs and your biases and your ideas are causing you to behave in a way like the person, like we in HR, like we technically know this. The HR, I'm not HR, I'm HR adjacent. So I work real close to those folks. But here's what we know. I can be biased against women all day long. But when I say something out of my face that is sexist and inappropriate, there are repercussions for that inappropriate behavior. I mean, I've been in organizational situations where we've had to respond to people who said, a white man of whatever his reason is, has said, I do not wish to work on a team with a Black person. I'm sorry, we don't make hiring assignments. We don't make job assignments, team assignments based on race. That is not a thing that we do. So whether we're talking about this from the macro construct of organizational behavior, organizational inclusion, we focus on the behavior, we address that, we identify what we want, and we create accountability when we see the opposite of that. And you have to educate people on what you want. And it also goes down to the interpersonal level. Where do we get all tripped up? We get tripped up because a human being, a fallible human being, makes a mistake. They say something inappropriate. They commit a microaggression, or as I've tried to rebrand it, a subtle act of exclusion, SAE. And, we are quick to cancel people. We are quick to call people out. Guess what, y'all? Every single one of us has committed microaggressions. We are going to do it again. And we need to stop saying, you're just a racist, and say, hey, that comment that you made has racist overtones. Like that is an inappropriate comment and can be seen as racist. It doesn't mean I'm a racist person. I can be an amazing person, a good person, a thoughtful person who happens to have believed or internalized or stated something that is racist or supported a racist policy. And it doesn't mean that I, the person, am bad and wrong. So differentiate the character assassination, the character of the individual, and the behavior, the thing they did or said. Address the behavior and stop attacking the individual.
Yeah, so you're really saying your work is with the human doing, not the human being, and you're not trying to change people. I had a colleague who said to me years ago, I don't care what you believe, I care how you behave. And to be transparent, the hair on the back of my neck went up, and I said, no. That's why you're not driving the kind of impact you want, because you're not changing people's hearts. And again, transparency here. There's still a big part of me that feels that way, because behavior comes from belief. And so can we get to a root cause and stop dealing with the symptoms of this person's beliefs and get to a point where they change? But I think what you're saying is not that you don't want the human being to grow and develop and mature. What you're saying is that's not your job or obligation, and maybe even that's not your privilege, that you get to have a wand. And am I hearing you right? I just want to make sure I'm not putting words in your mouth.
You are. And there's a place for changing minds and hearts. And I would say, like, for instance, my mother's been doing this work for so long that, she doesn't do the implementation work, at the entry level of the organization. She is, the CEO and board of directors whisperer. I have never seen her work with a single human being. And you can put them at the apex of privilege, like white male, heterosexual, Christian, wealthy, whatever. And she can take that person and not only help them see the behaviors, but she has the ability to open and change hearts and minds. That's what she actually does. That's a very different thing. Now, I believe that at the leadership levels, it is really useful to have leaders whose hearts and minds are oriented towards inclusion, are oriented towards equity, are oriented towards justice, you can get so much more done faster, more efficiently, more effectively if your leaders are oriented in that way. And one of the things that, I think that stifles our ability to make real, sort of progress in these spaces is that we continue to hire and promote for technical competency. We are not upskilling ourselves in the capacity to ascertain when people are able to create a beautiful sense of welcome and belonging around them. How do you motivate the people around you? Are you able to, inspire those who work with you? We don't get to that in the course of our interviews and our screening process, and we need to. We need to stop calling them soft skills, and we need to refer to them as interpersonal competencies, cultural fluencies, right? Cultural fluencies that allow us to create a space that people want to be creative in, that people want to contribute to. I believe that every morning people should wake up. Like, I woke up a little early for this today, y'all. That was a lot for me. That's why I'm talking so fast. It's the coffee. But every day I get to wake up and feel so amazing that I get to contribute as my full self into a world and make spaces a little bit better than I found them. It is a privilege to be able to do that. And it means that I don't have to work because I get to live into my calling. Everyone should be able to make a decent living and support their families and also feel safe to show up as who they are with their blue hair or their queer selves or whatever it is, and just be able to do their work. And we're not creating that and nurturing those environments because we're focusing on, rainmakers and money makers, and we've privileged this, and it's the delusion of white supremacy has a whole set of constructs that privileges, just the bottom line and, hard driving work and keeping things very buttoned up and deliverables. And it's like, I'd like to see a new set of deliverables that includes grace and compassion and kindness. Like, what kind of work would we step into if the expectation was, yeah, you know what, you're human too, and you're totally going to screw something up. You're going to fail at a project. You're going to step in a hot pile of diversity doo-doo and say the wrong thing. And guess what? We're going to put our arms around you. We're going to acknowledge your humanity. We're going to learn together, and we're going to keep driving towards our amazing goals that we're here to achieve on behalf of the residents of where we live.
Yeah. Wow. You hit so much in that response, from like hiring interviews to, we hire for these job competencies that can be learned on the job easily, and often are retaught on the job anyways, and don't pay attention to what we call quote unquote soft skills, which are actually how we interact and engage with other human beings, which is most of our actual jobs. And you can look at research coming back out of the Fortune 1000 and saying, what are you missing? What are you missing? What do colleges need to focus on? What do, high schools need to focus on? And all of the answers are quote unquote soft skills. And they still haven't made it into the interview processes. And so what's the disconnect? Why, if you and I can see this so clearly right now, and probably everybody in the participant group is like, yeah, of course. Where's the disconnect if leaders are saying we need this and we don't have it? Is it actually shifting, and maybe I'm just not seeing it and you are, or is that not shifting, and why not?
It's shifting incredibly slowly, like a really irritatingly snail's pace. In corporations, it's not shifting fast enough because their primary operative is maximizing shareholder value. That has nothing to do with how you treat people. Nothing. Now, I'm part of the B Corp sector, right? Benefit corporation sector. And increasingly, we are incentivized and motivated by doing better by people, doing better by the earth, doing better by the world. So we're seeing some shift there, not as fast as I'd like, but that's starting to happen. I would say that in government spaces, it's bureaucracy that holds us back, right? It's all the systems and the structures and the procedures and the policies and the red tape that cause things to move really slowly. We are doing it this way because we've always done it this way. Institutional knowledge, right? People who've been there since the dawn of time, who have been rewarded for behaving the way they've always behaved. Like, I've shown up in municipal environments that are like plantations. where people are using inappropriate plantation language to describe and direct their direct reports. And it's because they were around in 1902, to take it back to hyperbole, right? And so what happens is when you've got people who, and this is the same reason that the work gets stuck at middle management, because if I've been successful all this time doing it this way, then why on earth am I going to change anything? And the sad thing is that the vast majority of organizations that embark on this work, even with the greatest of and noblest of motivations, folks like that know that if you just wait a while, it'll go away, right? This is just the flavor of the month. And I'm not going to change diddly squat. I'm not going to do a single thing differently, because if I wait long enough, it'll go away and I can go back to the status quo. The status quo is a Jedi enemy. We are fighting the status quo. The status quo is not designed for inclusion. It is not designed for well-being of the people. It is totally counterproductive to these kinds of goals and initiatives. So this is why I wrote Erasing Institutional Bias, because we have to be brave enough to examine and challenge the existing way, the status quo, the systems and the structures. We have to be willing to look at them for embedded bias. We have to be willing to tear down subjective processes that just allow me to favor who I want to favor because I want to favor them because I'm, we're human. We're comfortable around people like us. Every time we went to a dinner party back when we were allowed to socialize, we would have a conversation with someone and look for the points of connection. We would light up when we found out we went to a similar school or, came from the same state or like the same football team. It doesn't matter. That's the point of connection. So our tendency to have that affinity bias really just kind of drags down our ability to be terribly inclusive. So we're fighting the systems, the structures, and the status quo.
Yeah, so a couple of things I want to jump right in, because I think you just hit the nail on the head for what feels, I think we've had some of that zoom up conversation, and I think you just nailed the zoom in, sort of like there's our doorway, because you're talking about the culture of public sector status quo, which I don't want to overcategorize and I never want to paint anybody into a corner. But in general, many people who work in the public sector feel like this space is not innovative, doesn't change quickly, is sort of marked or marred by this kind of status quo, tenured, I can wait anything out as I march toward my retirement and pension kind of culture, right? And that's very deeply entrenched. And earlier you mentioned, 10 years ago, the work was really top down, and you had these executives and top tier leaders looking at some of the markers of what needs change. And 10 years ago, maybe largely litigation, today, largely profitability and innovation. And 5 years ago, you saw this bottom up movement, right? From sort of front line, we are starting to feel the repercussions in the professional space. But, absent from that conversation is this middle. And we get this barbell effect, right? The front line gets it because they interact with the customer or the consumer and the community. Top tier gets it because they get the professional development and the retreats and the zoom up conversations. But man, we've got this corporate and public, but I want to ask you a specific public question, but we got this whole middle that is like, feels stuck. And I think probably a lot of the folks on our call would qualify as like middle management layers. And so I want to have a really honest conversation, not to paint people into corners and not to, no blame, no shame, no accusation. But as we're participating in this call to figure out where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? How do we take a culture that is so entrenched in this status quo, or whatever kind of language you want to use, and how do we start this shift in that middle management space?
Right. So erasing institutional bias, I think, is a good choice for anyone who wants to examine affecting change in that space. All of my books are written from the perspective of, I am one person. I see some things that I find challenging and problematic. How can I affect a change on a system when I am just one person? Because I believe very strongly in the power of the individual to affect a change on the system, right? Great change has happened over the course of history many, many times by motivated individuals taking something on. But one of the things that I talk about in the context of, institutions and organizations is you really do need a coalition of people. If you're one person and you're banging on a drum trying to get something done in the manner of Jedi, it's very easy to shut one person down. People get fired for less, and people will unfortunately invent reasons. If you've got enough power that doesn't support what you're doing, you are too easily disappeared. And I don't want to put anyone in harm's way ever. So what I would share with you is that you're not alone. There is no such thing as an institution that has not at least a few people who are feeling the same pressures, who are feeling the same kind of heartache around what isn't and could be. So identifying the coalition of people who support the values that you are trying to, that you're trying to lift up. Once you kind of have that coalition, I think there's I identify a bunch of steps. Like, you do have to understand your own relationship to these challenges, right? So how are you benefiting from from the status quo, and be honest with yourself about that? And how are you contributing to that status quo? Because if you're going to challenge it, people are going to challenge you right back. So you have to understand, and the more you understand how you're benefiting and how you're contributing, the more you'll be able to relate to the perspective of, the leadership and the people who support the system, who don't want to get on board with you because they are also benefiting. So you've got to understand their perspective in order to communicate effectively. And then the next thing I like, leading with data. Like, I'm a data junkie. So we've TMI Consulting is leading the way in DEI ROI and accountability metrics. My industry is, practically devoid of meaningful metrics that help calibrate culture. We're really intentional about calibrating our budget, our fiscal plan, our marketing plans, et cetera. And we just kind of hire a bunch of people and hope it all works out. Yeah, because, look at our society. People get along fine. Just put them in a box together. It's gonna be great. That's crazy, like actual lunacy. So the idea of my kind of thesis is that with metrics, you can intentionally calibrate your culture. You can define down to granular specificity the behaviors that you're trying to support, the behaviors that you are definitely trying to de-incentivize, and the aspirational picture of what is the day-to-day lived experience we actually want our employees to have. Like, even when we have DEI statements, we often are talking about how we want to treat the people out there, the constituency, versus the people who are doing the hard work. Hey, tell me how you want me to feel every day so that I can hold you accountable and say, hey, you know what? My pronouns, I'm non-binary. My preferred pronouns are they and them. I'm not offended by she. But if I feel like no one will ever use my preferred pronouns, I don't really feel safe and comfortable. Like, I'm not actually me in the workplace. Who do I talk to about feeling included? Who do I talk to about that if you've never said that how I feel every day matters in some way? So understanding the metrics that are driving the reality of your organization, understanding what the metrics are supporting. Are they supporting inclusion, exclusion, or something in the middle? So when you've got your coalition, you understand your relationship to these challenges, how you're benefiting, how you're supporting them, and you're able to bring your coalition of people together with data to say, hey, leadership, like, we love working here. The work that we do is so meaningful. Like, providing clean water to the people of our city really matters. But you know what else matters? All of us and how we're doing. And here's the data that shows us that, there aren't enough of, whoever us are, or us aren't feeling particularly welcome. Can we get a survey to help us understand where we are so that we can move towards a measurable goal?
Yeah, so you started to hit it there, and I want to review your 3 steps for folks to make sure everybody heard those. But my question I was writing down as you were talking is how do we as team leaders, how do we metric belonging? Because I think that's really what you're hitting is belonging, right? We're missing voices that we want to belong, and or once voices come into this space, they don't feel like they truly belong. I shouldn't say voices, people. Yeah. Do you have, hey, here are a couple, 2, 3, 4 sort of metrics that are really helpful for team leaders to maybe do some engagement surveys and some listening sessions around? What are some concrete examples?
Sadly, I calibrated an incredibly complex algorithm for that over the past 10 years. I'll put the website in the chat so that you can see what it is. But I can tell you that the way that you start without getting overly complex is just by asking people. Okay, so we do exit our interviews sometimes, right, when people are leaving, and those are really valuable. Like I can tell you, I have landed a number of contracts because some beautiful brown person was finally willing to tell the truth of their experience, and when somebody read it, they were like, maybe we should get some help in here. Okay, so that's fine, but why wait till they're gone?
Yes.
Start doing stay interviews, interviews whose only purpose is to find out how people are doing and what we could be doing better. Wisdom of the crowd. All of us are always smarter than any of us. All of us are smarter together than the smartest person in the room. And we do too much waiting for Superman to be the smartest person in the room and fix everything. If you actually go to the people and say, hey, how are you doing? What do you need? How could we support you better? Those people will tell you, and then the onus is on you to do something about it.
Yeah. So ask people, but I love the idea specifically of a stay interview. That's so good. And this isn't meant to be self-serving in any way, because there are lots of people that can help, but I have been hearing from people lately who want to have these conversations at work now more than ever with their team leaders, that bringing in an external person relieves some of the pressure from those who want to say things, but can't say it when it's their supervisor or their manager or their boss asking the question. So I was just in a listening session with a small tech company, really fantastic company, great culture. The CEO brought me in and said, I just want you to create space for people to, tell us how they're doing, because I'm not sure if I ever get a real answer. And a Black woman on the team who has been on the team since the company started and loves the company said on that call, I love this place and what we do, and it's full of microaggressions against me as a Black woman. And the CEO, you could just see both his jaw drop and his eyes well up, because she hadn't felt like she had space to say that before. And as soon as somebody outside the circle of this person could fire me asked her, she shared it. And a moment like that is almost like a stay interview, because you get a new metric to now align policies and behaviors around, what's happening, what's not happening that we need to start shifting and adjusting and fixing.
And she was really brave to do that with an audience. I would say, we're not, TMI Consulting we're not doing any work that isn't long-term. People have to engage for a minimum of 12, 18, and 24 months to even engage with us, because we do long-term sustainable impact change. We can't do anything for you in 3 months. Like, you can engage with our online learning and things like that, self-serve stuff, but for real strategic change, you need time. But never has there been more in the way of individual practitioners. Like, there are a lot of, for instance, Black women out here who have their own sole proprietorships who are doing this work. And there's lots of folks creating space for people to speak one-on-one, particularly with someone who looks like them. No offense, Daniel. Like, there are just a lot of people who aren't going to speak up in a group and who aren't going to talk to, a man, right? Or a white person or whatever. So if you have the ability to curate a diverse group of interviewers, and you can tell them exactly what you're looking for. There's a lot of practitioners. The challenging thing with our space is that there's no barriers to entry. And so it's people who just started doing it last year are going to show up. But if you tell them what you're looking for, anybody can conduct an interview, and all they need to do is create a rapport with someone, establish that they're there on behalf of leadership to really get a feel for how folks are doing. That's not a complicated piece of work, but can be executed in a way that will give you much better data if you've got, that external third party looking in.
Yeah, that's great. We have a couple of questions coming in from audience, and I want to shift that direction a little bit. One of our participants, when we were talking about those hiring practices and the soft skill, thing, two questions came in. Number one, are soft skills really going to get the job done? And what's the balance of, like, if I just hire for soft skills, like, how do I know this person can sort of competently practice the competencies that I need? / another version of that same question came in at the same time, which was, a lot of managers and team leaders, the reality is they need to get stuff done. So if I lead a team of 10 people, working in this part of the city, providing water or something, I need to do that every day. And if I just hire for soft skills and then have to on-ramp this person into the competencies of the job and whatever, I just don't feel like I can spend that kind of time just hiring the right character. I've just got to get the competencies. So what's the balance? What would you say to somebody who's running a small or mid-sized team and feels like I don't have room to hire good people and give them an on-ramp for 6 months. I need them to hit the ground running. What's
So
your best case?
Not an either or. It's not an either or, right? So never in the history of my 20 plus years of doing this work have I said, for instance, hire someone because they're Black. Ever, never. And I never would. You hire someone because they are competent, because they are the best person for the job. What you have to understand about hiring for diversity is like, first you have to have technical competency. That's like that should go without saying, but let's say it. Technical competency required. What you need to understand about additional dimensions of diversity, equity, and inclusion are like, I'm invisibly disabled, LGBTQ, non-binary, Black, and English is not my first language. Okay. So with these identities as part of my diversity, there's just no way that if you present me with one of your, perennial challenges, that I'm going to approach it the same way that the usual suspects do, because I'm bringing so much different kinds of experience and perspective to the table. So you have to understand that when you're hiring for additional diversity on top of the technical competency, you're basically getting multiple additional master's degrees for each new dimension of diversity. Those are really valuable to your innovation, problem solving, connecting with the constituencies, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing goes for these interpersonal competencies. Technical competency first. You are also looking for the interpersonal competency, because when you've got folks who have these interpersonal skills, in addition to the competency, they're going to help you with things like recruiting and retention. They're going to help with things like decreasing the number of HR complaints that you have off of that team. They will be able to de-escalate. They will be able to motivate. They are going to contribute to the culture in a non-toxic way. You can hire for just competency, blow off the soft skills, and end up with a toxic you-know-who that is just running roughshod over your culture and costing you way more. You might get decisions made quick because they're making them all and not letting anybody chime in, but everyone's going to hate their job. You're going to get more in the way of attrition. You're going to get people, calling out of work for stress, right? You're going to get all kinds of extra nonsense where you're going to pay for that decision over and over and over again, where privileging both technical competency and interpersonal skills will reap you rewards and dividends over time, and just cause you to have a much more robust and safe and welcoming culture. So it's not an either or, both and.
Yeah. Another really important shift when you think about leading a team, you've got to shift from sort of embracing the binary of either or into sort of stepping into the challenging, confusing, chaotic gray space of both and. But when you lead people, all the binaries go out the window, right? So I love that response. I'm going to recap your 3 points for sort of action items just for people to hear them again, and then I've got another participant question. First thing, to take a step toward changing and pushing back against kind of that status quo culture. You said identify your coalition, the team of people that you feel like are going to sort of step into that momentum creation with you. Understand your relationship to that system and how you contribute and benefit from it, so that when you get called to the carpet, you can say, yes, I know. And then number 3, lead with data and metrics, so that it moves from kind of the wishy-washy, touchy-feely to we're having a real business, strategic, mission, vision, goals, objectives conversation here, not just a kumbaya moment, as many people position it sometimes. Okay. And I'll try to wrap that up at the end too, because I think those 3 steps are just so concrete and actionable. We've got a question from a participant, and I'm going to read it because I don't want to take the words out of this person's mouth. I've got it as a quote here. It says, for gay men over 50, like myself, who have had a different experience and find the term quote unquote queer extremely offensive, how do we reconcile that with the fact that the younger generation loves the word and uses it constantly, no matter how it affects me? It's like our feelings are completely overlooked to keep Gen Z happy. So I'd love for you to address that person's the specificity of that question, and maybe also expand it a little bit into some of the generational conflict, even as we approach these sort of Jedi conversations.
So he said the word queer was offensive to him?
Yes.
Yes. Got it. Okay. Yeah, I mean, man, this is, it reminds me of, I used to make the joke all the time that people are like, yo, do you want to be called Black or African American? And I would laugh and say, look, I don't know what the coalition of Negroes, that's what we were first, has decided we are going to be called this week. Like, I don't know. I can't keep up. Personally, it's interchangeable to me. Just as long as people know that all African Americans are Black, but not all Black people are African Americans. Like, we need to understand what language means. But the reality of these terms is that you cannot apply any of them to everyone who might even qualify within that group, right? Because it just doesn't work. Not every term works for every person. And so with the Black and African American construct, you can use what you use, but you need to be aware of the factual differentiation between the terms. And you must understand that when you are speaking about a specific person, the one and only way to know what they are comfortable with is to ask them or listen for what they use to describe themselves, full stop. So for generational differences, I mean, LGBTQIA+, right? We added a plus because, like the Black community, we're trying to be more inclusive, but the acronym just keeps getting longer and longer and longer. And different people have different feelings about these things. Queer has become a catch-all for so many things in that community, right? So, I identify as non-binary. I'm technically, because I'm non-binary, there is no, if you can't pin my gender, then my sexual orientation is hard to nail down. So I'm technically pansexual because gender doesn't actually factor in for me. When I was in my 20s, that was considered bisexual because men and women, but I now don't conform to the gender binary. So it's incredibly complicated. Queer has been used as a catch-all to just say, look, this is our community. And what we have to do if we are not okay with the term is we have to speak up and advocate for ourselves and say, Catherine, I recognize that you're from a different generation from me. Please don't use queer to refer to me because, in my day, queer was a term that was used to cause harm, and it's a trigger for me. So the only thing that you can do as, a white gay man over 50 is to be clear and specific that this is your experience, and the way that you show me respect, right? The way that you show me respect is, use my honorific, doctor, call me they, them every once in a while in amongst the she's. That's how I know you see me. And what you communicate to the people around you, younger, older peers, is, for me to feel like I belong and like I matter, I would really appreciate if you didn't use the term queer to refer to me, because it's a trigger for me. You cannot stop that generation from using that word as a catch-all, because it is kind of a commonly accepted term. So it's okay for them to use it in reference to their community or everyone else. It's not okay for them to use it to you if it is harmful to you, but you must speak up and advocate for yourself. And that's what we need. We need environments and workplaces where it's safe for someone to say, I really just want to be in this meeting and contribute and do my job. But every time that word is used, I find it offensive. And you might be able to get a team that is gracious enough to not use that word in front of you. But that requires relationship equity. That requires a situation where they feel like you've been respectful to them too. Because if they're holding on to something that you did or said last week that felt disrespectful to them, it's going to be harder for them to find that grace. Not that that's justified, but this is where we need to have, and that's my kind of closing mantra for everything, is grace for the self and grace for others. Got to have grace for yourself on this journey as a full-time, globally recognized practitioner in this space. Every single day I mess up. Every day I say or do something related to diversity inclusion that is technically wrong or offensive. Somebody called me out for something that I did on a Zoom the other day, and they called me in privately in the chat and said, hey, you may not be aware of this, but this thing you did, oh my gosh, it hurt my feelings. And I acknowledged it and apologized to them. And I took it back to the group and said, I just want to thank this group because someone chose to call me in and give me an opportunity to grow and be a better version of myself. And I'm going to name this out loud for all of you. I named the offense, I owned it, and I kept moving. So have grace for yourself because you're going to mess up, and have grace for other people. Treat them the way that you would want someone to treat you if it was you that was messing up, because next time it probably will be you.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're talking about this paradigm of calling behavior out and calling people in, right? Like you started our conversation with, right? It's not character assassination. We're not trying to throw people under the bus. And you're referencing, and what a great opportunity for a team leader, as we were just talking a minute ago about how do we develop, a good inclusive culture in a team. If a team leader knows that's what's going on. I have 2 team members who identify as part of the LGBTQIA plus population, and one of them embraces a certain word and one of them does not. What a fantastic opportunity to visibly and explicitly work to help those 2 team members communicate to one another and to the team in ways where everybody feels like, oh, we truly get to show up. Like our leader, our manager, our supervisor has our back. They actually want us to feel like we belong, because those sort of hot button, that stuff happens constantly, right? Within the LGBTQ expanding vocabulary, a lot. It happens with, as you mentioned, Black versus African American. People ask me all the time, like, hey, should I call people Black or African American? Like, well, no one has appointed me yet to be able to tell you. I'm still waiting for my certificate in the mail. But probably you should ask people, because the language is always political, right? Language always denotes and connotes and embeds and awards or steals power. And so ask. I think about conversations we're having now about riots and protests and Black Lives Matter. No, all lives matter. Black on Black violence. I mean, there are so many things that somebody says, maybe with the best intent, maybe with some germs of, let's see what happens when I say this in this group. And what a great opportunity for team leaders to set the pace for inclusive language and helping people raise their hand and say, this word is not helpful to me, this language is not helpful to me, and then coaching folks around them to figure out how to move forward.
And just to put it into context, when I'm microaggressed, when someone hurts me with their words, we have information now that shows us that if you stab me with a knife in the hand, the pain center in my brain is going to light up. When I think about the memory of you stabbing me in the hand with a knife, the same pain center is going to light up. When you call me something that I find offensive, the pain center in my brain lights up. When I think about going to a meeting where this person who keeps calling me something that is offensive, the pain center is going to light up in my brain. There's no differentiation in your physiological form between harmful words and actions and physical pain. So why does this stuff matter? Because most of us fancy ourselves to be good and decent people who aren't trying to cause harm. Well, all these people with all these terms and all this non-binary and all these pronouns, and it really doesn't matter. And I'm too old, whatever. No, dude, you can't just say that you're too old, because why are we here? This is kind of an existential thing. If we're going to care for each other, if it was your mother, your sister, your sibling, your brother, your father, your child, you would take greater care not to stab them in the hand with a knife. And what I'm asking people to do is remember that essential humanity that binds us all together. The vast majority of the work that I've seen over the past 20 some odd years comes down to the central tenet that when we get to the workplace, suddenly we devalue each other's essential humanity. And so much pain would be avoided, so much drama, so many lawsuits, if we would just stop and have some grace for each other and recognize that every single day, in every single moment, every single one of us is going through our own personal war, our own personal battles. Some of us are winning those battles, and many of us are not. So we need to have a little bit more compassion for each other.
Yeah. So good. And we're getting a bunch of questions and I can't get to them all. Maybe I want to address this last question because I told them I would. And if you can hit us with a 30-second sort of snapshot, that would be great, because I want to honor your time too. This person says, Dr. Janna mentioned that bottom-up involvement and in requesting change. We talked about that. And this person says, do you think inclusion is something employees embrace, or do you feel like it's caused more division in the workforce as we've sort of pushed hard into, or maybe not pushed hard into, this conversation? What do you think?
No, the vast majority of people embrace it because it's for the people. I always say that I don't work for management, I work for the people. When it's being done well, then everyone feels included. White men and straight people too, right? Everyone needs to know their part, and everyone needs to be part of that joyful reunion of, human spirits inhabiting bodies for a little while. It's something that for the most part, people people do very much appreciate it. The folks who are detractors or who don't understand, it's interesting because the folks who push the hardest against it are my favorite people, because they're not actually haters. It's like the opposite of love is not hate, it's apathy. People who just disconnect and they're just like, whatever, I'm going to get my check, I'm not engaging with this trash. That's a whole different person, much harder to deal with. Someone who just actively doesn't like the diversity thing, they hate it, et cetera, et cetera. They just don't understand their part in it and why it's so important. That person always becomes my favorite person, because that's a highly engaged individual who is so deeply cares about the culture that they want to see a solution that works. So what you do is you want to capture that person's energy, find ways to engage them, because when you flip that energy on its head, they become the most active supporters of DEI initiatives.
Oh, that's great. And I think I'm looking at the time, and I know I've got questions that haven't gotten answered, but I feel like that's a great place to leave it, is don't run away from those conversations, especially as team leaders and that middle management layer, that status quo culture coaches us, just leave it alone. Don't touch that kind of hot energy, but you're saying engage with it, press into it. Someone asked the question, all of this stuff requires caring. We can't legislate caring, can we? And it's sort of like, no, maybe yes, but we can certainly model it as team leaders. And so pressing into that kind of energy is so good. So I am so grateful for your time this morning. I know our participants have had a fantastic time with you. We're so grateful to you. For those in the chat box, and if your video cameras are on, would you please thank Dr. Janna for being with us? Give them a virtual hand clap.
Thank you. I forgot. I didn't realize how much I loved and missed applause until it all went away. That's the Zoom applause. Thank you.
You don't do it for the claps, but you start to miss them when they go away, don't you?
I'm doing it for the claps. Keep clapping. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for being with us. And I know we've referenced some of your work in the chat box, and we'll make sure participants know how to get a hold of some of your books and your articles, and can contact your organization if they want to. So grateful for your time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful week, and may you all have a weekend that is highly differentiated from your weekdays. That's my pandemic blessing for everyone. Do not let your weekend look like your weekdays. Mwah.
Thank you. Have a great one. All right. We are going to move into a quick break to give folks a chance to kind of get refreshed and resettled in before we move into a fantastic panel conversation. And so what I want to do now is introduce Katrina Cannon. She is the Workforce Diversity Director with the City of Columbus Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and she is going to take us into break.
Hello, everyone. So across this conference, we wanted to be really intentional in providing you with a variety of resources and supports in creating more inclusive environments. We are calling these little video breaks DEI Insight videos. During the next 10 minutes, please feel free to take a break or watch these videos. Today we have 3: equity versus equality, what's in a name, and why D&I aren't about race, but everyone thinks they are. Please sit back and enjoy your break and enjoy the videos.
These days, we hear a lot of people using the word equity, but what does it really mean? It's not quite the same as equality, which means everybody gets treated the same. Equity is about fairness. It means that everybody gets what they need based on their own situation, because we're not all the same. The difference between equality and equity is important. It's part of the reason the United States spends more on healthcare per person than any other advanced nation and has much poorer health. It's important to remember that a person's health depends on many factors, things like their environment, schools, and workplaces, to name a few. We call these social determinants of health, like clean drinking water for children and easy access to fresh food. We can follow the lead of communities like Columbia Gorge in Washington and Oregon, where businesses, doctors, and farmers tackled the local hunger problem with the Veggie RX voucher program. And the New Jersey Partnership for Healthy Kids is bringing down high rates of obesity in underserved communities.
We should be inspired by these local efforts and remember that health equity is all about making things better for all of us. When everyone's healthy, everyone benefits.
Well, discrimination comes in many forms, but how many people miss out on a job simply because of their name? If you've got the qualifications, the experience and the references, surely that should be enough. But as Jackie Quist reports, it's not.
There's a lot of ingrained prejudice still in this country. I'm angry, bitter, and I feel like as if I'm a second-grade citizen.
Australian-born Miroslav Mirsky says when it comes to securing a job, the name of the game is to sound like an Englishman.
My Christian name I changed to John, and my surname is still being looked at.
22 months unemployed, the qualified engineer with Polish heritage is convinced Aussie employers prefer Anglo-Saxon-sounding candidates. Professor Andrew Lee agrees.
The most callbacks come for Anglo-Australians, the fewest come for Chinese job seekers.
Professor Lee and researchers from the Australian National University put employers to the test, sending out 4,000 identical resumes to measure reactions to different ethnic names, discovering that names were more important than the details and experience listed by the so-called candidates. Finding Anglo-Saxons were called back 35% of the time, followed by Italians, the Indigenous, then the Middle Eastern and Chinese job hunters.
They're all fake CVs, so we make sure that if we see differences in callback rates between Ahmed Hariri and John Smith, that's actually racism rather than anything else.
After applying unsuccessfully for more than 1,000 jobs, Sudanese job seeker Anouk Lueth actually resorted to using the alias Daniel McLean. Of the 6 fake name applications submitted, he received 5 callbacks.
Ask ourselves, why is it that we're not being accepted?
Saturnino Onyala is Secretary General of Australia's Sudanese Community Association.
But now we're being trained and being graduated here in Australia, and yet we find that we can't get a job. We find it extremely difficult to understand this situation.
The aim is to get the best person for the job. And the best person doesn't come from a particular background, is not a particular gender. It's the person that's most qualified and most able to do the job.
CEO of the Victorian Employers Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mark Stone, believes employment racism is almost non-existent.
We've got 25% of Australians that were not born here in Australia and 40% speak a language other than English at home. So with employment running at almost zero, we've already got a very strong diversity across our employment population.
Yet Taiwanese-born Yahui Yang spent more than 10 years looking for work in Australia, according to husband Dirk Biddle.
And they see her name on the resume. They see an Asian name. They think, well, perhaps she doesn't understand and maybe not read further into her resume.
And despite meeting Australian standards, experienced anaesthetist Moataz Shaghi applied for more than 85 healthcare positions with no luck.
Everyone talk about shortage in medical workforce, but we are sitting here. We are ready for work. No one gives us the opportunity.
Where's the justice? I mean, as you can see, it's quite difficult to prove, and the employers at the moment have got the upper hand.
Can you keep looking?
Keep looking.
We choose not to talk a lot about diversity and inclusion. We're not running from the topic. We actually feel like we're addressing it head on, using analytics and revenue and profit to drive the conversation versus some moral imperative. And what that means is that it's not about fairness and equality alone. It's about equity, which is about people getting, if you treat someone as a person, they need a little more of something than perhaps someone else. And actually, if you treat everyone the same, you are not going to get the best out of everyone. So equality can be used, in fact, to exclude people and to make the environment a place that certain groups of people don't want to be in, because you're treating everyone the same. That's just not the way humans work. You know, I have 2 kids. One of them might need, when they were young, violin lessons. Another one might need dental care. Well, the dental care costs a lot more than the violin lessons, but they both got something that they needed, but it wasn't necessarily ever equal. But it's addressing people where they are. We also find that diversity and inclusion, once you bring up those words, tension goes up in the room. Because what happens is when you say that, what people think is race, but they don't want to talk about it because they don't know how to talk about that. So they awkwardly talk about diversity and inclusion, and the problem that needs to be addressed gets diluted. We begin to talk about, we can't talk about race. So then we just say people of color and people majority, because we can't say race. And then we talk about men and women because that's easier than race. And then what about the disabled? Oh, well, we can't really bring that up. And all these buttons go off that stops the conversation. What we pursue is called a great place to work for all. That's the way we do it. So we think every employee, regardless of who they are, or what they do for the organization, should have a great experience at work. So that includes everyone. It does not separate anyone to say, well, one group should have a really great experience and one can have a less great experience. It means all. It turns into something positive, and people then get engaged. And they go, yeah, it should be a great place to work. For me too, absolutely, for everybody here. So let's talk about how to do that. And you find the whole room starts to lean forward. Rather than the other topic, people can't wait to get out the room. And talking about the other topic, I've heard that conversation for about 40 years. It hasn't gotten us very far at all. What we should want is for everybody to be like it is at the top of an organization, excited about coming to work and doing something that you really, really care about. You're paying for it. It doesn't cost you any more money. So you're just getting more for what you're paying for. Most business people get that. They get it and they go, okay, what's getting in the way? Well, and we have the analytics to help them know what's getting in the way. It's the way they're being spoken to gets in the way. It's if you're listening to them or not. Are you sincerely caring about what they're saying and using it to innovate and to make business decisions? We ask, does management involve you in their decision making? Do you feel informed about how management makes decisions? The reason we ask these is so we can understand what a person's experiencing. And we know a certain type of experience that makes people say, I love it here. Because we ask, do you plan to work here for a long, long time? And people will say yes. And you can predict it based on whether people are listening to them, whether people are welcoming them, whether people are rewarding them, whether people are recognizing them, whether people address them personally rather than as an employee in mass communications. You can actually predict these 2 things. And then you see it in the results of the company in terms of the employee experience. The number's very high. And we've proven that the revenue growth of the company, we have a hunch it's going to be higher than others. And we look at the data and in fact, that is true.
All right. I hope you had a fantastic break. Welcome back. I am so excited to pass this conference off to our next set of panelists and moderator. I want to introduce our moderator really very quickly and let him introduce or allow the panelists to introduce themselves. We're calling this, today we're focused on inclusion. We're calling this our power panel because we've got some really high impact leaders here to share with us. But I want to introduce our moderator. His name's James A. White Sr. If you've not had the privilege of working with him before, he's a master training management consultant and executive coach. He owns and operates Performance Consulting Services, headquartered here in Columbus, Ohio. He's got a formal degreed education from MATA Drafting College, Capital University, and The Ohio State University. He's accumulated tens of thousands of hours of platform delivery experience, co-authored a book called A Better World, Understanding How Your Personal Operating System Affects Culture, Diversity, and Inclusion. And just to melt our brains a little bit, he has to date successfully trained over 250,000 people. So I just want to get out of his way. Please welcome with me James A. White Sr. as the moderator of our inclusion panel. James?
Now, thank you. I appreciate it. I know I'd like to give a shout out to the session this morning. It was outstanding. I really, really enjoyed the difference in terms of someone doing a keynote by you asking questions and really dealing with specifics, as opposed to where traditionally people will do a keynote, they're standing and they're delivering information to you. I'm really excited this morning about the panel discussion. I'm really looking forward to it. And what the thing I want to do in terms of how I would like to conduct this, since we have 3 people on the panel, what I want to do is to kind of throw that question out overhead and then allow each person on the panel to be able to grab and kind of talk about their thoughts and feelings around that particular topic. And then if someone wants to build on that or expand on that, please feel free to do so. What I'd like to do first is, why don't we take a moment and have each one of you introduce yourself, maybe take a couple of minutes and just talk about, tell us who you are and what is your driving compassion around this whole notion of inclusion? What is your driving compassion around the whole notion of inclusion? I'm not going to pick a name. So, like Sunday morning when that spirit hits you, you say, woo, I'm ready to go. So whoever's ready to go ahead and get started on that.
I guess I'll go first.
Okay.
I only can see Mayor Whaley's face. So I'm Katie Crosby. I am the Chief of Staff for the City of Toledo. I've been in this role for about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I was the Executive Director of the Human Relations Council for the City of Dayton, and actually reported directly to Mayor Whaley and the commissioners there. My driving force behind diversity and inclusion is that, anything that I do is about making sure that there's opportunity for all. And growing up, I grew up in a family, low-income family, 5 children. And one of the things that my mom, there were 2 things that my mom always said to us. The first is that once one of you succeeds, it's important that you go back and you help the other succeed. And the second is you always do what is for the highest and greatest good. And so not as an adult, and that I use those 2 things to approach my work. And so I'm always trying to make sure that I'm going back and helping others to succeed in every role that I'm in. And then secondly, always looking to do what's for the highest and greatest good. And I believe what's for the highest and greatest good is ensuring that there's equity in the process. So in the break, they talked about what equity means and what is the best thing to get the best product out of the person that is working for you, and making sure that people enjoy the environment that they're working in.
Thank you. Great.
Good morning. This is Nan Whaley, Mayor of Dayton, and it's great to be on a panel with Katie. I miss her terribly in Dayton, and so proud of the good work she's doing in Toledo, and appreciate this opportunity to share with everybody today across the state. I think for me, this idea and the work of inclusion is, trying to create the kind of city we want to live in, and we have significant work around that every day, but we know that an inclusive community will actually drive growth for the whole community at large, and it will be a better place to live. And we really, at least in Dayton, and when Katie was here under her leadership, we've really tried to drive home this idea that that's what we want to be. Like, if you're not interested in inclusion, we're really not interested in you in our community. And I think that is saying it, that being that blunt about it, I think is really, really important too, for the community as a whole. Because there are people, frankly, that aren't interested in inclusion, and we wanted to be very clear and very upfront that that's our vision and the work that we need to do for our city. So it's a pleasure to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Mayor.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm not quite sure how to follow Katie and Mayor Whaley, but I'll do my very best, and thrilled to be with them on this panel this morning. I guess I got from your question, James, the gist of the why. I think for me, I grew up in an unusual household. My parents had foster kids in our house for the better part of 3 decades. I think they counted up at one point or another 47 foster brothers and sisters that came through our house growing up. So not all at the same time, but over 3 decades. Some came and spent the night, some came and spent the night and spent 10 years. But I learned from a very early age about disparities and about inequality, particularly around opportunity, circumstances that children were born into, challenges that they faced that I didn't. As a kid growing up in a middle-class 2-parent household here in Columbus. And, that was reinforced by my experience growing up in city schools. We were still busing at that point. So schools throughout the city and saw firsthand the different disparities between neighborhood quality life, best friends that lived, didn't look in mine. Very different challenges growing up to this world. And as we started our work and, on the things, we were really focused on 2/3 of the city pre-COVID were doing better than we'd ever done before. 1/3 had been totally left out and left behind in that juggernaut that is. And so we needed to be honest with ourselves, look ourselves in the mirror and say, why was that? What got us to the point where, 1/3 in the same community, in some that's why our equity, priority in this administrative city at this time.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. And also I'd like to just take a moment and thank you for your mom. She made such a contribution to the community, had opportunities to know her and work with her, and she did some really outstanding work in this whole area of inclusion. And so I'm sure she would be proud of the comments that you're making today. Okay, now let me take the next question. Recently, a message came out from the Office of the President of the United States. And the message that came out was that there are some people of the majority population who feel assaulted by the whole notion of teaching diversity and inclusion in the workplace, and that those kinds of programs are having a negative impact on them because they are feeling extremely uncomfortable. With that coming from the highest office in the land, how do you address that with your executive staff members and also people in your community? Mayor, I'm gonna let you start since you were the last one on this. I'll let you kick that one off. Mayor, I'm sorry, Mayor Ginther, all of the mayors. Mayor Ginther. I think you may.
Can you hear James?
Yes. Yeah, we recently
is my audio coming through okay?
It was breaking up a little bit. Let's try it now. And did you hear the question?
Yeah. Okay. Are you able to hear my response?
No, I was not.
I think, here in the community is to understand that we have a vision of what we're trying to do here on a local level. I think Mayor Whaley hit it on the head. Speak clearly about knowing that the overwhelming majority of people that we work for and serve to be part of and do the
yeah. We're not hearing
you.
Why don't we?
We'll try reboot.
Okay, all right.
Come back in just a minute.
And we'll go ahead and shift and move on to Mayor Whaley.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I mean, this is difficult. We find the top leadership federally going against a lot of the values we hold as a community. And I'm not going to pretend that that's easy. Being mayor during the Obama administration versus the Trump administration is quite an adjustment. The Obama administration was someone that we looked to as a partner. Just for example, on our immigrant friendly work in the city, they helped fund that work. And, when the Trump administration came in, it was the opposite. And so you're talking about a city that is pretty cash strapped, having to figure out ways to still provide for communities without federal help. That has been very difficult. And then on a myriad of issues, from inclusion to COVID to gun violence to extreme weather and climate change, I think it's a very lonely time to be a local leader, and feeling that, I think, because I know what it was like under the Obama administration, it makes it such a difference. One of my friends that's an Ohio mayor made the point that he believed that our jobs would be 90% easier if we did not have President Trump in leadership. Now just think about that. Because of the lack of partnership and because of the difficulty in communicating. And look, I'm not surprised that white people have a hard time with the conversation about inclusion because we've had privilege. And, that means that some things are going to be given away. That is true, but it makes it better for the entire group. And I think that's really the challenge that we have in these conversations, but we need to be honest about it and, recognize that when we make the pie bigger, everybody gets a bigger piece. And that's really what we're trying to do when we have these conversations and these actions.
Thank you. Thank you. Chief Crosby.
So, I think one of the things that, so first of all, I agree with everything that Mayor Whaley just said. I had the privilege of doing a lot of work under the Obama administration, around equity and inclusion. As a person that oversees day-to-day operations and in a community where we have a significant amount of race issues and the climate is very different from not to say that other communities don't have race issues, but the climate is very different here than where it was in my previous role. For me, it's even more important for us to be vigilant about making sure that we're educating our workforce. Data tells the story. And so one of the things that we did walking in the door is we did an employee engagement survey, and it showed that there was a lot of disparity in terms of how our workforce felt about the environment and the opportunities that were in the workforce. And that actually mirrored the sentiments of the community. And so not only are we making sure that we're putting tools and resources in place to address what the workforce is feeling about the lack of diversity and the disparities in our environment, but we're also working with our community partners with public and private partnerships to make sure that we're addressing those disparities too, and using data to drive that. So we're not deterred by the comments of the president. We just recognize that we need to be more vigilant about ensuring that we're educating our workforce and our community about the need to address those disparities.
Thank you. Thank you. Mayor Ginther, let's try it again.
Does that sound any better?
Yes, much.
All right. Well, thanks for your patience. And I will always play second fiddle to Katie and Mayor Whaley because they have a whole lot more to offer and great insights to share. But I will pick up where they left off and, just really reinforce comments made thus far that it's really about local priorities and local identity and the vision you lay out for your community. So regardless of what is coming out of Pennsylvania Avenue or wherever around the country, the role of the mayor, I believe, is to set the tone and to cultivate and develop the culture of the local community. And so equity, diversity, and inclusion are very, very important to this community. I know to Dayton and to Toledo as well. And so even in the midst of whatever conversation and craziness is taking place at the federal level, one of our former colleagues, Mayor Bob Buckhorn of Tampa, used to say that, there are a lot of people who run for office to be, mayors run for office to do. And so I think that it's incumbent upon mayors, and leaders in local government to make sure we're setting out a clear vision. And as I always say, if you're not measuring it, you don't mean it. So putting out very clear expectations and goals. My directors know that they are going to be asked about the equity agenda every time we get together, and certainly when we're talking about their budget and their annual evaluation. And so taking a look at workforce diversity, supplier diversity, and our equity agenda. Are we prioritizing neighbors and neighborhoods that have been left out of the Columbus success story? There's a difference between equity and equality, as the video said during the break. And we need to be looking at diversity, inclusion, and equity through a lens, not a box to check at the end of the process.
Excellent, excellent. When I heard all of you make your comments, and I was thinking about what is going on in our community now that's really a major divider. And what hit me was the whole notion of Black Lives Matter. So the question I'd like to pose now would be, how do you position Black Lives Matter within your own cities and within your communities? Do you see it as a historical, social, moral issue, or is it being positioned as a challenging political position? Because the way people see that could either bring them together or it could create great divides. And the thing that I have appreciated most about what has been going on, not that I appreciate the protesting, but I have seen for the first time in my life that a large percentage of majority population, white folks, Asian, Hispanic, are out there protesting in an inclusive kind of a way. And it just it just takes me to a whole different level of consciousness. Like I thought I would never, ever see anything like that. So what do you do to position the whole Black Lives Matter within your community? Whoever wants to grab that one first.
So you asked the question about how it's being positioned. So I'll start there. So I think it's both. I think, there's this, this agenda and these priorities that we definitely need to pay attention to in our community. And unfortunately, it's being used as a political tool to divide. And I think as leaders, we have to determine or discern what are the valuable things to listen to and begin to figure out how do we get to a solution. And so one of the things that I learned in my role as the executive director of the Human Relations Council is that, in every environment, I believe that, disruptors and agitators play a role in bringing issues to the forefront. And we have to figure out how to elevate those voices in a productive way so that when we're thinking about the policies and the programs and the initiatives that we put in place, that we're making sure that that we're taking into account what those voices bring to the forefront, which is sometimes those voices that are marginalized or that we don't get the opportunity to hear. But I think the other thing that we have to do is that we know that the squeaky wheel tends to get the oil. So we also need to make sure that that we're verifying the information that we're getting and finding ways to engage those individuals that we normally don't hear in the discussion, and make sure that we're addressing those issues and that the issues that folks are bringing to the forefront are actually the issues that we need to address. And data will support that, but then also those conversations with stakeholder groups help with that as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Whaley?
Sure. I think the answer is yes, James, to your question. Is it either or? And, that's just the nature of community events. And it's not surprising things get politicized, especially when everything gets politicized in today's environment. But I think the way I'm excited about a couple of things around the movement that we're seeing right now. Number one, as you mentioned, you're seeing white folks come together with the Black community to say, hey, this is really wrong. And I like to say that the city of Dayton is about 50-50, and it's pretty segregated community. And it was like half of the community woke up to realize what the other half of the community had been going through every single day. And that awakening is helpful to the community to come together and really understand each other's, situations. And then the second thing I'm really excited, particularly around the Black Lives Matter movement, is it's generational too. And so we're seeing a whole new generation, particularly of Black leaders in the community, that's giving us, I think, a really big opportunity to really take the next step in inclusion and deal with systemic racism that is very, very difficult. It's been set into place for hundreds of years now, and to start taking those systems apart. And it needs new energy. And so to see this next generation of leaders, particularly in the Black Lives Matter movement, is really, really exciting for mid-sized cities like Dayton.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Ginther.
It's great, a great question, and appreciate Katie and Nan's thoughts. I think you're absolutely right. In this environment, something as simple as saying Black Lives Matter, which seems pretty direct, clear, concise, simple statement. Either you believe Black Lives Matter or you do not, or that you can't say that with a but or an and so do, other lives matter. If you simply can't state that, that makes it a challenging environment to do the things that we're attempting to do around diversity, inclusion, and equity. If you can't say Black Lives Matter, period, it's a challenging environment, and one that's being used for political gain to divide communities, even coalitions of folks that have been working on progress and reform in a variety of different ways, and even in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I do believe that we really are at a place now where we're trying to sense, and even those that have led protests in Columbus and in Dayton and Toledo and around the country, how do we move from protest to reform? And there's an incredible sense of urgency right now with folks, particularly young people, but folks across the board. And I agree with you, James. I mean, really inspired by the diversity of the groups that have been protesting and demanding reform. And one of the ways we're trying to, seize this moment is we've got a couple of issues on the ballot, one for a civilian review board and inspector general that we've been talking about, quite honestly, in Columbus for decades. Police reform is part of our equity agenda that we laid out earlier this year, but a place for people to make that pivot and transition. I think one of the other things we have to do in the same vein is look at our systems. And I think Katie spoke to this a little bit earlier. Look at our civil service rules. These are archaic, sometimes rules and processes and procedures. And when we're really honest about it, they were set up as a way to exclude, not include,
yes.
And continuing to delve into police and fire testing and requirements and standards that, again, in many cases, historically have been used to exclude, not include. And when I've charged our safety director to double the number of officers and firefighters of color over the next 10 years, yes, we've started a cadet program we think is creating an incredible pipeline into police and fire. And our last two classes in both police and fire have been the most diverse. And by the way, the highest scoring, because one of the important parts of our work is continuing to debunk this false choice narrative out there that it is either, the best of the best or diversity, which is complete BS, but it's something we have to continue to answer and lay out the facts that you can have excellence and diversity and reject those false choices that are out there. But those are the critical things that I think, particularly from a government perspective, that we have to continue to do.
When you talked about thank you very much for all the comments. When you talked about recruitment, one of the things that I know has been coming up, and it was also in Dr. Janna's book, and she spoke to the fact that organizations today, in order for them to be able to recruit minorities and women and people who are not currently applying for their jobs, they are creating pipelines and they're creating systems and processes that they know that they can go to pull people in who happen to not be visible within their current population, especially in law enforcement. Are there any particular pipelines, or are there any particular programs or initiatives that you have introduced? And Mayor Ginther, you just kind of mentioned that you may want to expand. That's going to allow you to be able to bring in that appropriate number of minorities and women candidates to function in law enforcement, and not only law enforcement, but for that matter, throughout all other aspects of the city. Anyone have a plan, or what are you working on to do that, to make that happen?
Well, I'd mention just the three things. We're doing a good amount of recruiting out of the military, because quite honestly, the military has been far ahead of the rest of the country, and certainly a lot of employers with respect to diversity, inclusion, and equity. And so making sure that we're really focusing on veterans in both positions, and a lot of times veterans, it's a natural gravitation towards police and fire, first responders anyway. The cadet program that I mentioned is showing some huge success. And so these are young people between the ages of 18 to 21 that are paid part-time. They're part-time employees of the city in a 2-year program to put them in a better position to be accepted in the academy and become police officers and firefighters. One of the things generationally that we've looked at is that, particularly for fire, and to a lesser extent police, there are a lot of multiple generations of police officers and firefighters within families, uncles, cousins, grandfathers, so forth and so on. And so oftentimes, if you don't do anything to disrupt or create new pipelines, you're going to continue to see what you've seen in your divisions of police and in fire historically. And then the third thing I would mention beyond the cadet program and recruiting out of the military is also creating and setting the tone at the top about, I talk a lot about going from a 20th century law enforcement organization to a 21st century community policing organization. And if we are interested in changing, reforming the division of police, I think that also resonates with candidates of color and from the majority population that want to be part of progress, reform, and change, that don't just want to be part of a traditional law enforcement model. And I'll say that because we wrapped up at the end of July our application process, and we had a higher percentage of diverse candidates, applicants through that process than we'd ever had before. And I think part of that is the message is getting out there, as imperfect as it is, that we're about change and reform here. And there are a lot of young people that want to be part of that.
That's good.
And be part of that movement and reform effort.
That's excellent to hear that, because what we're finding, I know I've spoken to a number of young African-American males and older ones for that matter who qualify. When I say older, I'm talking about probably in their early 20s. Mm-hmm. And even though they think it might be a great thing to do, they just don't feel like they would be included, not only in the law enforcement arena, but also if they would be included back in their own community. So there's some community work that needs to be done.
Absolutely.
In that particular area.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yes.
So we're in the process of working with we have a lot of career tech schools. And so we're looking at how we can work with our career tech schools. One around EMT training to prepare students so that when they graduate, they have that certification. And then they either can prepare to go into the fire academy, or until they're of age to go into the police academy, they have an opportunity to earn an income. So that's the first thing. But I think the other thing too is that it creates an opportunities for those young people to be in the environment and learn the language. And so as Mayor Ginther talked about the generational opportunities that are presented for police and fire, oftentimes, and you look at this even in corporate workplace culture, for minorities and low-income individuals, they don't have that language and they don't understand the culture that is associated with those environments. So the more that you can expose young people to those environments early so that they understand the language and how to navigate those cultures, the better opportunity that they have to be successful when they get ready to go into the academy. Now, I talk about culture. The other thing that we need to be mindful of is two things. One, we're talking about police reform, and a lot of that reform is about the culture of the police department. So we also have to be careful that as we're trying to reform our police departments and we're trying to recruit young people into the department, that we're also training them in this new culture that we're trying to create. And I really like what Mayor Ginther talked about, is moving from a 20th century policing organization or policing type of organization to this 21st century community policing model. So making sure that we're recruiting our young people and encouraging them to move to that model. And then the second part is around testing and going back to the language. And so if the testing is skewed toward a certain type of language that is traditionally common in white communities, and that language is foreign to minorities or poor people, then you also create a disadvantage for them because we haven't adjusted the test to be culturally sensitive. So, and that has come up when you look at some of the consent decrees around the country and policing, that, you know, looking at the testing and looking at the language and making sure that we understand what's being used and how that impacts somebody that's taking the test that may not be used to that type of language or exposed to the vocabulary that's on the test.
Could I throw a question at you? By removing law enforcement officers out of the schools, which is one of the pieces that's been happening, do you think that was a good move, bad move? How does that impact the familiarity of young children, youth, being comfortable with a law enforcement officer?
So I want to, if you would indulge me for a minute, there's a quote that I want to read that I think is really important to policing and the challenge of policing in the Black community. It says, "For if you suffer your people to be ill-educated and their manners to be corrupted from infancy, and then punish them for those crimes to which their first education disposed them, what else is to be concluded from this, but you first make these and then punish them?" So, and that's from Utopia. And so when I think about policing in the schools, the challenge that I have with that is that oftentimes you are exposing young people to law enforcement officers who may not understand the cultural experiences and the historical experiences. And so now you've introduced young people to this form of policing that is punitive versus being more community oriented. And so I think that whether you have police officers in the school or not, it's more about how are those individuals engaging? Is it restorative? Is it an opportunity to teach them good conflict resolution skills so that those conflicts are not spilling out into the streets? And that's where we're getting our gun violence activity. So it's not so much about whether or not you have law enforcement in the school as much as it is about how those officers are engaging those young people and whether or not that engagement is legitimate.
Thank you. Mayor Whaley, I saw you moving your head and kind of nodding on that one. You want to answer and kind of build off of that?
Sure. I think Katie completely nailed it. It's all about the details of how they're in the schools. For example, you know, we actually had Mayor Ginther's team. We're doing police reform work in the city of Dayton as well. And each commissioner is leading a team, and my team is on recruitment, something that we have, you know, for 50 years not done a good job on, even though it's been declared a priority. And so, you know, how can we really break through and get a more diverse workforce in police particularly? And I think, you know, again, I'm thinking of this much more broad than race, but also in experiences, because I think that is really important. Race is certainly important, and so is gender. You know, there's study after study that shows that if you have more women in the police department, they actually de-escalate situations alone, but also de-escalate their male partners, which is really an important point. And currently, I think there's only about 5% of police across the country that are women. So, you know, there's definite efforts that we need to undertake. And particularly, I think we need to recruit broader. Certainly we have, because of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, we have a large military presence in our police and fire forces. But you know, I'm really challenging folks to think about going to nursing school and social work school and saying, hey, have you ever thought about being a police officer? Because those kind of skills are the skills we really need to have in order to change the culture of policing. And it's a deeper question than just diversity, I think. It's a question of public safety and, this idea of public and safety. And that's harder to measure. It's important to measure, but it's more difficult. And certainly I think we all fight for this in diverse communities, right? This is something that's really, really important to every mayor of a diverse city. To Katie's point, I think it's actually helpful to have police helpers in the school, right? It's a way to really break down that relationship. But if you have police in the school and it's punitive, it does the opposite. So it is really about how police connects in that school. Recently, we started a program with Dayton Public where we have a full-time officer actually teaching from like 14 to 18-year-olds to think of folks that might want to be interested in being police officers. And then we're going to steal the idea of Mayor Genther's cadet program because, mayors steal ideas constantly. That's what we do.
It's called inclusion. That's inclusion.
Yeah, we love to take other good ideas. And so, how we keep, because of the OPATA certification, unlike fire, we have this program in fire for Dayton Public, but firefighters can become firefighters at 18. For police, it's 21. So there's a real key part of, how you fill that gap to make sure you keep kids connected. That's really key from the 14 to 21. And we want to grow our own. I mean, I think the other challenge with the loss of residency in the state of Ohio is, our police officers are not from our community now. And, regardless of race. And so they don't even understand Dayton itself. And, I tell folks that really what's happening in our country, and it's so exciting, is the community is saying they want to be policed differently and they want a different relationship with police. That is exciting. It's a great opportunity, and we must listen and move because it involves the public. I mean, it is called public safety, and so this is I think a really exciting time and a big opportunity coming forward for communities to really challenge each other and think of ways that we can do better, not only to change policy but to change culture.
Okay, thank you very much. Getting back to this whole notion of, is inclusion an illusion? And as you're saying, how do we get officers from the community as opposed to from other areas? We in this field, I know I can remember myself when we first started doing this kind of work, we called them encounter sessions, and then we went to diversity sessions, and then we went to inclusion sessions, and then consciousness, inclusion, and integrity. And as Dr. Jada mentioned this morning, JEDI, which was a brand new one for me, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. I'm saying, yeah, that really does sound good. It really sounds interesting. Is this a myth? I mean, are we just changing vocabulary? Are we in a position where, okay, these are the terms we used last year, we need another set of terms this year? This is what they're using on the West Coast, and this is what's happening in the East Coast. Are we really, really making progress on this whole notion around inclusion? And I think Mayor Genther mentioned what we always talk about from the military: don't expect what you don't inspect. So you said you went back and you're looking to see, and are we measuring to see where is this taking place, or is it not taking place? And then do we have to shift and do we have to change? So with that, are there too many terms out there? Because once I embrace one and I get comfortable with that, it shifts again. It's almost like she was saying, when I was back in my day, when I was a Negro, I understood what that piece was. And then I went from there to being colored, and then Afro-American, then African-American. Now I'm just Black, right? So are these terms helping, or are these terms challenging and creating barriers between people being able to come together? Because I don't know what I should be this time. So who wants to grab that one and run with that one?
So I'll start because I want to be as transparent. I'll be professional in my response, because I just think, it's just, for somebody that has worked in the DEI space or the JEDI space or whatever you want to call it, most of my career, I really don't care about the terms. I care about what the data is saying. And the data is telling me that we are not moving the needle. Things are not changing. As a matter of fact, we're worse than where we were when the Civil Rights Act first, came to be. And so I think what happens is that, as Mayor Whaley alluded to earlier, while we have more folks marching and I think Mayor Ginther talked about this, all of a sudden, you have more people that are woke, for lack of better words, around the issues that are happening, then we start creating these new terms as if it's a new idea. The reality of it is, when redlining existed, that's how our community started. When there were discriminatory policies that created neighborhoods, that's how these issues started. So it doesn't matter. And then all of a sudden we get this pandemic and we get a president who doesn't care about these things. And now we want to say, oh my gosh, we got to do something. Well, we needed to do something back in the 1930s when these communities were created. And so I really think that we should move away from getting caught up in the alphabet soup and focus on the data, because the data, the way that you calculate the data doesn't change no matter what year you're in. And we can see that for Black and Brown communities, we still have disparities. When we talk about, going back to that quote that I said earlier, and these are the things that I get really passionate about, but if you go back to the quote that I said earlier, you put folks in communities or you create barriers for people that prevent people from moving from low opportunity to high opportunity. And then you're punitive in your actions towards them when they respond to that. And so now we have this situation with the pandemic that has led to frustration and lack of recreational opportunities for our youth. Now we have this increase in gun violence, and all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, we have to talk about these problems. We needed to talk about it a long time ago, and we got to figure out, how do we invest the resources to actually make a difference in these communities? Because we'll be back here again in 5 years when the next epidemic happens.
Okay, thank you. Who would like to grab that now?
I can't really add any value than Katie. I completely agree with Katie. And I think the other thing, I would just add one piece. And when we get hung up on the terms, we have a tendency to make this work exclusionary rather than inclusionary itself. And so I really warn about that. Like, of course, we want to educate people. We want to, use the correct terms. But I think then it becomes, we have a ton of people that are learning this space for the first time right now in these past few months. And so we have a choice as people that have, worked in this for decades or recently to it, how we're going to include people in this work. And if we make it very difficult and say, oh, you used the wrong word, and so therefore you don't understand, we're going to push people away. And I think that's really the question we have to ask. We definitely want to educate people on the words they choose. And but we also have to give, I think, especially during this time with everything going on, I think we have to be keepers of grace and give people the grace to get to the table.
Thank you.
I think the only thing I would add to what Katie and Nan have shared, I think there are two things. I think you also need to be very specific and hold yourself and your team accountable. And so we announced 30 by 30 by 2023 on African-American Women's Pay Day in August, which unfortunately was later this year than it was last year. And based on what we're seeing with COVID, will be even later in 2021. And what that means is that we will commit to 30% workforce diversity, 30% supplier diversity, and 30% of board and commission diversity by 2023. So this is really important for us to take this leadership role in the Columbus community and hopefully encourage public, private, nonprofit partners to join this 30 by 30 movement, because we need to be specific. In addition to doubling the number of candidates of color in the police and fire academies over the next 10 years and other things. And I would say that words do matter, because what we need to continue to talk about equity. And I think particularly for Mayor Whaley and for Katie and myself, we lead cities, that where taxpayers expect equality. They want, whether it's investments from the general fund or our capital budgets, to be split up evenly and to have everybody treated fairly. Well, if you're committed to equity and an equity agenda, things are not going to be done equally. We're going to make strategic investments in people and in neighborhoods that have been left out of our city's success, period. So it is not going to be equal.
Right.
And so we need to continue to talk about that, because I think a lot of the people I work for still can't quite differentiate between equality and equity. And quite honestly, the greatest pushback I get with our equity agenda is in neighborhoods that are doing just fine, that want their fair share of city resources. But that's inconsistent with our equity agenda. And so having them understand that we can't reach our full potential as a community unless everybody's sharing in the success of the community.
I can't say that any better. I cannot say that any better. That was one of the, as an administrator, having these conversations about spreading resources like peanut butter. And it's like, it's mind-boggling, because you see the challenges that are facing, many of our communities, and you see how much it takes to bring these communities up to higher opportunity communities. And if you look at poverty statistics, I think it's, I can't remember the name of the website, I'll have to get it for you, but it talks about how in the last 30 years, low opportunities or communities that are high concentrations of poverty, they haven't moved. We have these conversations about gentrification. Well, particularly in the Midwest, gentrification doesn't exist. I mean, right. You have communities where we're making investments, and you move in tipping point communities over to communities that are thriving, but real gentrification, if you look at New York, that's real gentrification, where you talk about a higher percentage of the communities that have gentrified are in New York. But we're dealing with issues where we just aren't investing enough in moving our communities from low to high opportunity. And that's really where we need to direct our resources to move that needle.
And I would just add to that, I think on this equity lens, that I think most Ohio, the legacy cities of Ohio, the mid-sized cities, have been on this equity agenda for quite a long time, right? I think I've been at City Hall for 15 years. It's always been about the public sector putting money in the places that don't get resources by the private sector. I think the real challenge is the private sector money doesn't follow. And so it becomes very frustrating to the community, because the only place they actually do see is the public sector money, which clearly isn't enough. And so that's the challenge we really see. And I'll give one example that we saw in, I think, 2009, 2010, when the telecom industry decided in this state to basically redline our communities based on broadband access. And every Ohio elected official that was from a center city fought this and lost in the state legislature. And that is having incredible implications right now amid COVID, because they decided where the infrastructure was going to go was where the places people could afford, and the places that they could not afford, they were not going to put that infrastructure in. And by the way, most public sectors are not allowed to even provide this infrastructure. They made the law that difficult. So these kind of decisions, while they may seem mundane at the time or not a big deal, have huge equity implications during the pandemic we're in today. And that's, I think, the frustrating part for us in leading communities and leading cities in this equity lens, that most private sector simply does not follow.
Yeah.
And when you, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I couldn't agree more. We just had a meeting yesterday morning with our C-suite executives from the private sector to say, look, first of all, we need to come together around a community strategy and identify the priorities for our community. And then we need your investment to follow the public dollars. And, unfortunately, as administrators and elected officials, too often we get the brunt of the community saying, look, you're not investing enough, and that responsibility is not shared. If you're taking dollars from our individuals and your bottom line is benefiting and your shareholders are benefiting from our residents paying for services for your company, then you should be making an investment in our communities as well.
And that's one of the really difficult things to do, because I live right now in a regentrification area on Franklin Park, and I see the money coming in. On one end, I'm saying happy, because guess what that's doing for me and my property value. But at the same time, I'm seeing or not seeing my Black neighbors who used to be here and who used to participate. They're no longer here. money, private sector investment tends to follow where more money, more money, more money. So what that leads to is this: how do we then go after those people who have been in the market for a long period of time? They're stuck in the old ways of looking at things. They don't see inclusion. For them, it's all about the dollar. And I had one person say, well, I got mine. I had to work hard. I had to pull myself up by my bootstraps. So why shouldn't other people have to do the same identical thing? How do we influence that population that's in control, that's in power, to see that inclusion brings value? And do we believe that inclusion brings value? Have we been able to articulate it ourselves? I know it's a nice thing to say, but where do we show, where do we demonstrate so that the people in that private sector says, yes, I see some value there? Mayor Ginther.
I'd say we have to continue to make the case and show the results. As I said earlier, our most recent police and fire classes have been the most diverse and the highest scoring in the history of divisions of police and fire. And I think, continuing to show the connection between excellence and diversity, and that there is a great value proposition. And we talked about this when we announced the 30 by 30. There's a great value proposition for the community by embracing this. That it makes our community, particularly if we are marketing ourselves as a community about being smart, open, progressive, on the move, whether it was, winning that Smart City Challenge and opening up different modes of opportunity and mobility, and thinking about our equity agenda, we think that's going to position us to continue to grow and prosper and attract the best and the brightest from around the country and the world, because cities are going to drive the future of this country and of the world. And the cities that are able to attract and retain a disproportionate amount of the most diverse talent are going to have an incredible competitive advantage throughout this century. And so I think really having folks understand that great cities make for great economies and make for great communities is for them to understand. I'll say this to you. So our regional economic development strategy before, when we first announced it, was 2020, a public-private organization that worked with Jobs Ohio and others around economic development. They were very focused on creating jobs and raising incomes and those types of things. They've now fully embraced, and their strategic plan, they're now One Columbus, is based on a prosperity agenda. And they're weighing in on things like affordable housing and raising median incomes, on those types of things, because they know that that will make us a more competitive place with respect to economic development, job creation, and job growth. What kind of city, community, we're able to attract the best and brightest. And I think, we're seeing more examples of it even during COVID. Folks are looking to find mid-sized cities around the country, as opposed to having all their eggs in East Coast and West Coast baskets, places that are more stable, still diverse and inclusive, because they want the best and the brightest, particularly amongst young people. And that's where I think there are great opportunities continue to be for Toledo, Dayton, and Columbus.
I just want to put in all caps, underline, bold, and put in red. Mayor Ginther's comment about excellence and diversity, the connection, they are not mutually exclusive. And I think that too often, if you think about the Wells Fargo, I think it was the Wells Fargo CEO who said something about, there just isn't enough diverse talent out there. You're not looking hard enough, number one. And number two, if you have this box of which your talent should look like, that talent should fit within this box, then yeah, it's probably not going to be enough talent out there, not diverse talent. And so I think that's the first thing, that cities that embrace diversity. I mean, I think one of the things that we focused on when I was in Dayton, and what I enjoyed most about the role that I had when I was the executive director, is how we embrace diversity and the commitment to how does that impact our economy. So I can't stress enough about excellence and diversity go hand in hand. It really does impact the bottom line. It really does. And until we embrace that, you know, at the end of the day, our communities are only going to be as good as the individuals that are at the lowest end of the community.
That's exactly
and
it.
So we don't, and those are usually African Americans and Hispanics, our diverse community. And then secondly, if we are expecting people to come with the tools and resources, and we've not invested in them so that they are building on those skill sets, and then you want them to walk in the door and then you evaluate them based on what they didn't bring to the table because you didn't give it to them, that you're doing your community a disservice. And so I that statement, excellence and diversity, is not that people aren't capable, it's about the investment that you make to nurture those capabilities so that they can thrive.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Whaley, I'd like to ask you a question. You said Dayton is like 50-50?
Yeah, so it's about 40, 20, yeah. Okay. It's pretty even.
And so what I'm hearing with this, I know that African Americans and Hispanic folk are on the lower end of the echelon. How about white population that's in the lower socioeconomic? Do they feel that they are excluded because they aren't Black or because they aren't Hispanic, and they feel that they're not getting access to resources that will allow them to also, you know, mainstream, get some better jobs, what have you? And I'm saying that because of the balance that you tend to have.
Right.
And I even touch a little. I'm here in Columbus. I know on the west side, there are a lot of people in the lower socioeconomic population who want to have good things like everyone else, but they're finding that they're running into similar walls. And some of them are saying to me, well, hell, I'm not Black, so I can't get this program. I can't get in that program. You folk are leaving me out of the equation.
Well, I actually was on a call with somebody yesterday, and Dayton has a very high poverty rate. I think it is the third highest, unfortunately, in the country at 30%. And I think it's like Cleveland, Syracuse, and then the city of Dayton. And the fact of the matter is, and someone made this point, we actually don't have an enormous disparity between Black poverty and white poverty. So, you know, unfortunately, I say like everybody's poor in Dayton. Okay, so that gives us actually, I think, a real opportunity to bring people together, right? And so that's the way we look at it. Like, you know, what are the benefits that are for the entire community here? And that can be difficult because, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the joke we have inside City Hall is if you go to West Dayton, everybody says that you gave everything to East Dayton. And if you go to East Dayton, everybody says you gave everything to West Dayton. You know, that is the typical issue, I think, in every City Hall, that's what you hear. But the truth of the matter is there's just a huge opportunity in Dayton because we have a high number of white poverty and Black poverty to say like, hey, we all need these things. We all need these assets. We all need this effort. And as we keep moving forward decade by decade, we do have we are moving away from a less segregated city. It takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of systems in place to keep people in places. So, you know, breaking that up, I think, is also really important. I just want to mention too, there have been a couple of questions in the chat about, you know, how do we include the community in this work when we're talking about police reform? And it's one of the things I'm most proud of in Dayton is we have these 5 groups, and they're co-led by a commissioner and someone from the community. And then there's about 25 community members in these groups meeting on Zoom every other week and giving recommendations to the commission. Because I think what's also important in this police reform work and just overall these dismantling of systemic racism is it just can't be something I say or Andy says and then it's done. It has to be brought by the community, valued up. So there is it's an opportunity for gathering understanding and building trust between systems of government and the community. And so that's a part of of this, that now people are paying attention, we have this opportunity to engage the community in a real way. So we try to do that in this work as well, which I think will have long-term benefits past just the recommendations around policy.
Outstanding.
Yeah, the only thing I would add on top of Nandy, we've got a Chiefs Advisory Council. We have a Civilian Review Board working group that's all made up of community members that are helping to shape reform policies and procedures wise for the police chief. And then the Civilian Review Board working group, for the first time ever, we're going to have a vote in Columbus on a charter amendment, our city's constitution, around a Civilian Review Board. But it does raise the question, I think, James, that part of the question I heard from you is, look, there are a lot of people all over the country that are perfectly fine declaring racism a public health crisis and talking about systemic racism. I guess there's some folks that dispute that, folks here, and some would argue the occupant of the White House that don't believe in systemic racism. But I think 80% of the country is there. Yes. The issue is, that's not where the gnashing of teeth and the conflict is, right? It's the remedy. I think most people are perfectly fine accepting the facts and history that is before them. The gnashing of teeth historically has always been around the remedy. And that's where we continue to get the biggest challenge and pushback is, I think a lot of folks are perfectly fine saying things are not fair and they are not equal, and that racism and discrimination exists. And what we continue to do is push our private sector, nonprofit, and higher ed communities about, okay, so what are you going to do about it? Are you going to get off the sidelines? Are you going to endorse this issue in our community? Are you willing to fund the campaign to help establish a Civilian Review Board and Inspector General and help to fix the FOP contract? Because quite honestly, if all you're going to do is declare racism a public health crisis and continue to talk about it
and not do anything, yes.
Then you're not assuming the role of leadership, and that is to acknowledge it exists, call it out where you see it, and own the remedy. That's leadership.
And not walk away when it gets hard.
Yes.
We're talking about centuries of inequity and disparity and discrimination. And so what I see too often happens, not just on the side of our leaders, but even our community folks that say that they want change. It is, Dr. Janna talked about, she touched on the cancel culture, or I see too often people come to the table, and when you add the budget or the pragmatic side of implementing some of these policies, if it's not what they expect to get from it, they walk away from the table, and that impedes progress as well. So I think it's also incumbent of us to stay at the table when we start having these difficult conversations. And part of that is the trust building process. But I don't have a problem with people criticizing me or disagreeing with me. I have a problem with the way you do it. There's a respectful way to push back and criticize, but we gotta stay at the table and have these conversations if we want real change.
Where do you get the greatest resistance from those people who are not open to the change, who are not seeing a brighter future when it's an inclusive environment? Are there particular people, particular groups that's pushing against that? Because as we move forward with this COVID situation, how do we move forward and deal with those people who are the resistors, who either they're not contributing because they don't want to and they can, or they're actually throwing roadblocks in the way?
So I had a boss that, my first boss when I got to the city of Dayton, which Mayor Whaley is too familiar with, that always used to say to us, the higher up the ladder you go, the more your butt is out. And as leaders, we're always going to be criticized for the work that we do, but it is our responsibility to listen, to come up with solutions, and to make sure that the things that we implement are sustainable. So when I leave this role, I have to make sure that whatever I put in place, that the next group of leaders that come in, that is sustainable and that it becomes a part of our organizational culture and who we are. And so when you talk about doing that work, that's when you get the resistance because folks want things right now. And you, as an administrator and as a leader, we know that sometimes that change can't happen right now, especially when you're trying to make systemic change. And so, you know, part of it is that trust building process of, you know, there may be some low hanging fruit that you can say to people like, I can get this done right now. And then making sure that they are along with you in the process around creating sustainable change. But what I see as the biggest challenge or barrier to getting people to stay at the table is that folks want things right now. And if it doesn't happen quick enough, then they walk away. But I also think that it's really important that when we're creating those spaces for people to engage, that we have that diversity of thought and understanding in how processes work so that we can help bring folks along who may not understand. I can't get there right now, but let me tell you the process of getting to the other side of this solution.
So that whole vision piece. Any other comments? How do we move forward? What do we do with this COVID pressing us? Mayor Whaley?
No, I mean, I think this is tough work. Some people have been working on this for decades. We have to, you know, bring more seats to the table because there's more interest. Put judgment aside for those new people so they can really get to this and provide that opportunity for growth. And I think, you know, I think it's very good in the inclusion space, particularly that we're thinking way more broadly. And I think that will be a benefit to our communities long term. And, you know, I think also it wouldn't hurt to get some new federal leadership that actually supports this work.
Definitely. Mayor Ginther, you have some great initiatives in place. You have a tremendous vision. What's the resistor for you as you start to move forward, as you continue to move forward?
Well, I think, you know, some of the things that we're working on here really are an issue of a small number of groups or a certain amount of groups that have had either complete or a disproportionate amount of power and control. And so, as you know, that is never given away, you know, and true sharing of power and investing in a way, in an equitable way, there's going to be a great deal of challenge and confrontation and dissension. But we didn't get here overnight. Right. We're not going to fix it overnight. Right. But we sure as hell can make some progress while we're in the roles that we are, if we lead honestly, directly, and equitably.
Well, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your comments. And as you see, there's so many other questions that are coming in through the chat box. This could go on and on and on. But in my upper left-hand corner, I see a young man by the name of Daniel that just popped in. And if he popped in, he must be popping in for a reason. So Mr. Daniel, how are you, sir? Let's give them a hand, first of all.
Absolutely.
Give the Chiefs a hand, please. And we really appreciate the contribution. And we'll turn it over to Daniel.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Mayor Whaley, Katie, and Mayor Ginther, that was a fantastic conversation. I'm so grateful you joined us for it. That was an awfully real conversation. A lot of the conversations that I feel like we hear and see from our leaders who are entrenched in the politics of leadership, there's a lot of hedging and a lot of shifting and reframing the question. And I'm just really appreciative. That felt like a really hard-hitting and honest ground level question and answer panel conversation. And I know participants are feeling the same way. I'm seeing a lot of comments come up. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. James, thanks for walking us through that conversation. You covered a lot of ground. And I think as everyone would agree, no silver bullets here, no magic pills. We didn't just fix anything. But we had a fantastic conversation and explored a lot of big ideas. So I want to now hand it to Director Stallings Johnson. As we start to wrap our day, I'll come back on at the very end and officially close us out. But I'd love to hear from the director again, some closing comments from her. Director?
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, James, for your help excellent facilitation. And also thank you, Mayor Whaley, Mayor Ginther, and of course, Katie, for your insights and very candid responses. I can't believe it's 11:30. I can't believe how fast this day has gone, and we have 2 more days for everyone that will be joining us. So on behalf of the City of Columbus, behalf of myself and my entire workforce office, thank you for your participation. I took a few notes and I'm so excited about some of the aha moments that I mentioned at the beginning of the session. Excellence in diversity, nurturing capabilities to make people thrive. Call me versus call me out. I particularly like that one in the chat box. Cultural fluency and using interpersonal soft skills. SAE, subtle art of inclusion. Thank you, Dr. Janna, as well as JEDI. I think we used that a few times and we're probably going to get logos around that one. Justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and human doing and human behavior, looking at that one, and just simply looking at we have to measure. Metrics are everything in order to drive behavior. And those are just a few of the insights, the aha moments that we promised you at the beginning of the session. And tomorrow we will see quite a few more. So at this point, one of the things that we want to do is to make sure that you sit back and you reflect and you'll consider this day to be something that inspired you. It was supportive of some of your thoughts because again, we have a series of questions and questions inside of the chat box, some of which we couldn't get to today, but we're going to try our best to reach out to our participants and talk through. Again, we have more tomorrow. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning. Daniel, it's back to you.
Thank you so much, Director. A lot of my notes from the day mirrored yours.
I'm sorry. I was so excited.
No, you don't have to apologize. That's good. When people learn the same thing in the same space, we know the message got sent, right? Some great zoom up moments about the cultural shift happening from cognition to this visceral experience of what are we really talking about and meaning, and how we leverage that through our emotional intelligence and leading our teams and helping people feel like they belong by asking them, how do you best feel like you belong, like you're a part of things, like you're included, thinking about justice and the interplay there. I love this. I think Mayor Ginther said this right at the beginning of the panel. We have to figure out a way to move from protest to reform. And in my head, I heard we have to move from problem to solution. That's the way to shape the new conversation. We're not just talking about what's not working. We're acknowledging and owning what's not working, and we're exploring what might. And we're going to do that over the next couple of days. So thankful for your participation here. So excited to see the participant number hit the registered number. Everybody showed. That's unbelievable. And I'm so excited. So logistically, just so everyone knows, the link that you used today to access the conference is the same link that you will use tomorrow and on Thursday. It's for all 3 days of the conference. I'll send you an email with that link, just so you've got it again fresh, probably first thing tomorrow morning. And Eventbrite will send you a reminder as well, as it always does. So we can't wait to see you at 8:30 again tomorrow morning. Have a wonderful afternoon. Go get some lunch. You've earned it. Have a great afternoon reflecting on your learning, and we'll see you tomorrow morning.